The color pie system for role-playing is a system like no other. Not only will it help you at the start of your character creation process, aiding you in writing a compelling backstory that pushes away from typical tropes, it will also give you a better understanding of your character when it comes to role-playing and the decisions that they make, creating a character that almost plays themselves. Lucky for you, I have compiled the entire series into one extensive guide, covering every single one of the core classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, alongside an introduction to the concept. Once you're done with this video, I guarantee you won't look at your characters the same again. So pull out that character sheet, a fresh cup of coffee, and let's begin. The most important thing to keep in mind about people, and as an extension, their characters, is that no one is truly good or evil. Instead, everyone contains a set of personal morals that are based on their experiences and perspectives from their life lived. Morals that are influenced by our motivations and history. With this in mind, it only makes sense to then define those characters with a mechanism that has more room for nuance. And that is where the color pie comes in. The reason I want you to utilize the color pie in constructing your characters is because the color pie of MTG, especially when combined, tells us more about what motivates your characters than the alignment chart can ever hope to do. The alignment chart asks your character how it would react to certain situations, while the color pie tells us what motivates your character's decisions. Is your character a red-blue personality? Someone who is expressive, creative, and curious, in turn being driven to search for every hidden secret, not just for the loot, but for the satisfaction of discovery? Or is your character mono-black? Someone driven by their inflated ego to strive for ever greater success, causing them to take any advantage they can to gain more for themselves, even if it can sometimes clash with the rest of the party. Even with these limited examples, you begin to see that the color pie shapes a personality instead of defining its morality, which I believe is a stronger way of expressing your character, not just in your own head, but for the rest of the table. I have seen many attempts to make one-to-one comparisons of the color pie and the alignment chart, but in my mind this can never really work. You see, even if a color may find itself represented as things like good or evil, each color has within him the potential for these traits, and so that system shows its faults once you take the time to analyze it. Sure, colors like white would be lawful and colors like red would be chaotic, but it begins to fall apart when you realize that white isn't inherently good, or that neutrality can be expressed by either green or blue. As you begin to see, each color can have a version within the alignment chart, and because of this, you cannot apply them one on top of the other. I do believe that they can be used alongside one another in order to further define your characters, but for the purpose of clarity, I want to focus on the color pie on its own. I have studied the color pie extensively for the last few years, and on many occasions have applied it to characters across media, across philosophies, and have dived deep into the many faces of each color and their combinations. With this breadth of knowledge, I've come to learn that much can be defined by the color pie, and in turn, a better perspective can be gained. Unlike the alignment chart with its static definitions that only give us a part of the whole picture, the color pie is something malleable and dynamic, and by applying these colors to your character, you might in turn find out more about them through asking how the chosen colors affect your PC. The color pie is a wonder in that it is more than a simple guide of morality. It is something with a life of its own, in turn making role-playing much more satisfying, with opportunities for surprises, even for the person playing the character. So you want to use the color pie in your next campaign, but you want to know how you'll do it. Well, the first step, of course, is to understand the color pie. If you know nothing of the color pie, then don't worry, I have you covered. I've made many videos covering each of the 5 colors of magic, the 10 2-color combinations, as well as the 10 3-color combinations, and much, much more. These videos will teach you everything you need to know about the color pie, and will guide you as you move forward with enhancing your next campaign. But for a bit of a taste, let's go over each of the 5 colors briefly and how they can be applied. That way you'll have a better idea of what I mean. First up is white. White is the color of order, structure, selflessness, and discipline. A white character might be someone who looks to act on behalf of society, someone who stands up for those too weak to stand up for themselves. Or, on the other side of it, it might be someone who uses law in an authoritarian and shrewd way. Blue, on the other hand, is the color of cold efficiency, someone who's calculated and devoted to learning and perfecting. This might be a character who studies magic in order to better themselves and allow for greater learning. The downside is that a blue character might not have much charisma and instead is more focused on tangible goals. Next is black. Black is the color of realistic amorality, of ruthless resourcefulness. A black character is one whose motivations lie with the self and how to gain the most out of their life. They can tend to be a bit selfish in their decisions and don't allow things like societal morality to dictate their actions. Don't confuse this with someone who's villainous though. Instead, a black character realizes that it's a dog-eat-dog world and no one is going to look out for you but you. Then there's red. Red is the color of honest emotional action, of impulsiveness and passion. A red character might be one who tends to act before they think, getting themselves into trouble sometimes, and yet is someone who's trustworthy because they wear their heart on their sleeve. Finally, we have green. Green is the color of harmony and destiny, someone who sees the bigger picture and their place within it. A green character is someone who wants to live a simple life alongside the planet and its inhabitants. It understands who it is and acts in turn. This can sometimes make them feel out of place in big cities, but right at home in the wild, where things are simple. Now, of course, these descriptions only scratch the surface, but I hope it nudges you in the right direction and into doing more research. Now that you have a bit of an idea, I'm sure you want to begin, but how exactly will you work the color pie into your games? Well, I think there are two approaches. Let's start with the character first approach. In this method, you design your character, their backstory and personality, and then apply the color pie to them. This method will give you the most straightforward result, and once you have your colors chosen, you will then place letters or symbols into the alignment section to show where your character sits on the color pie. Once selected, you can then use it as a tool for when you're not sure what might guide your character's decisions. You can reflect on the colors present, and in this way, through the combination of your bio and the colors, your character will almost play itself, and lead to times where even you are surprised by its actions, leading to games that flow nicely and still allow for fun RP moments. What's more is that through declaring your color pie alignment, the rest of the table will have a simpler time understanding your character, and even gives your DM more to work with if they have a strong understanding of the color pie. The second method is the color first method. This method is a way to spice up your character creation process of your next campaign, as well as a way for the table to step outside of their comfort zone and play characters they might not otherwise play. In this method, the table decides on the number of colors they want while constructing their PCs. Choose a number between 1 and 3, and roll XD6 based on the number chosen and note the colors you land on. 1 for white, 2 for blue, 3 for black, 4 for red, 5 for green, and 6 will be a reroll. Once everyone has noted their colors, you then build your character based on the colors you receive. This way requires a bit more knowledge of the color pie, but the results can lead to some dynamic parties and characters that you might not normally play. Remember though, that the color pie represents personalities and not classes or races. You might be tempted to make all green characters elves or all white characters paladins or clerics, but I encourage you to not let those things come into play. This is about personality. Find creative uses for the color pie instead of falling into simple traps. Now, if you want to take the color pie one step further and use it in a more mechanical way, then you can replace all schools of magic with the color pie and require certain colors of mana to cast spells. I personally don't have a guide for you on that, but you're still in luck. Friend of the channel, Kearney, has designed a rule set for just this way of playing. If you want to check that out and support his work, I'll have a link in the description for that. You know, it's always good to support creative people because it can sometimes be challenging to get recognition for your hard work, so I urge you to at least check it out. I hope this gave you some inspiration. The Bard is an interesting type of class in that it is a performer, a charmer, a warrior, and a masterful weaver of magic. It takes both a dedication to hone its craft and requires its own amount of latent skill to master the bardic arts. The Bard is many things depending on how it is played, but there are key components that are seen across every version of the Bard. The Bard is clever, intelligent, and charming. It utilizes its deft hands and even more potent tongue to control, manipulate, and bolster. Because of these traits, there will be a few colors that tend to pop up from time to time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I want to first take a look at the class card provided to us by Wizards of the Coast in the set Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Interestingly enough, the Bard class card was given the colors red and green, and it was a choice I saw a lot of contention surrounding. Possibly more than any of the other classes in AFR, but I do see their intentions here, and I think it works. But only as a basis, or a single version of a Bard. So why green? Well, green is in fact a color that fits very well with the type of Bard who collects stories through song, which, when it comes down to it, is at the core of many Bards. It's a love for the tales of old, of songs passed down from generations, and of magic that mimics the words which breathe the multiverse into existence. As we can see, the color green fits into the Bard's identity very well. In fact, I see the basis of most Bards containing green, but not all. Remember, this is only one side of it. The magic of song can be found in more places than these. So what about the red side of this combination? Well, red, on the other hand, displays the side of the Bard that is a performer. Someone who exudes passion, charisma, and joy in everything they do pertaining to their craft. You see, when it comes down to it, red is a color you'll find in many performers, because performance is very much the expression of our emotions and of bringing out the emotions of others. The Bard simply takes this performance and use of story to a whole nother level, weaving magic out of words and sounds to create something new. When I think of what core monocolor fits the Bard the most, I believe that I'll always come back to red, as red is the passion, the emotion, and the driving force that sets someone on the path of performance. Now, let's take a step back and see what it means to be a red-green Bard. This type of Bard is a classical weaver of tales, of old magic, someone who takes what was passed down to them and breathes a new life into it. Their magic is old, it is wild, and it's fun. The red-green Bard is the kind to sit under a tree and weave magic that even a fairy would envy. So now we come to the point where we decide on what other colors could fit the Bard. And to do that, I want to drop green out of the equation and add in white. With a white-red Bard, we move away from the use of old magic and into the realm of bardic inspiration. The songs of deeds done are still present, but is now a tool to breathe inspiration into a new generation of heroes. This type of Bard is one that utilizes their abilities to rally others, to uplift latent abilities, and to bring out the true potential hidden within us all. Something very white. This Bard marches out into battle with bow on its back and horn in its hand, ready to rally armies into action, to inspire heroes into acts of valor, or to strike fear into the enemies who approach. With red still present in this Bard, they continue to act in a manner that is expressive and enthusiastic. It's just with white's influence, their focus is now on how they can push others into acts of bravery that are worth their own stories. White becomes a strong presence in this Bard, a focal point of its motivations, as it is less listless and more driven into action, guided by a moral compass. The white-red Bard not only is a witness to courage, it is right there helping create the stories it will later tell. What really sets a Bard apart from its contemporaries in the performing arts is its mixture of pure talent merged with its immense training. Anyone can learn to string words and tunes into a song, but to truly take the echoes of creation and turn them into magic that influences others takes a lot of training and a will to learn. Because of this, a Bard can often find elements of blue in their personality. So let's now remove the white from our Bard and add blue and black to the mix to see what happens. The blue-black-red bard is now a minstrel who obsesses over the perfection of their craft and of personal success within that craft. This bard might be the type who won't use its abilities so overtly as a war cry for others, but will instead use its guile, charm, and ability to persuade and manipulate. Once again, we still see the presence of red, a major part of its charm and empathy. Take note of that empathy though, for in the hands of this bard, it becomes something else. By understanding the emotions of others, it is more able to manipulate them, and that charm is a product of that empathy as well. As you can see, this bard has a lot of tricks up their sleeves already, but let's continue. The blue mana within this bard is what drives them to learn all that there is to learn. And as we know, when matched with black, this desire to learn is also tied to personal gain as well. It's ambition that facilitates a level of pride which is unmatched, as they are confident in their skills and will use them to their advantage. This ambitious, clever, and resourceful bard will then use their skills to influence others, as this is still the core of a bard's skill set. But instead of carrying on traditions and stories, or using it to uplift others, it is instead used to influence the mind of others, to make their target more malleable when it comes time to make important decisions, or to charm them into making decisions that are against their interest. This bard walks the fine line between heroism and villainy, but to them, no songs were ever sung about those who fell into obscurity. The final version of a bard I want to cover in this video is one that removes the black from our previous example. Here, we still have someone who is dedicated to perfecting their craft, and yet is wild about it, is willing to do it for the fun of creating. This bard might take less inspiration from the songs of others, and would instead breed new songs into creation, or take two spells and mash them together in a new way. The red-blue bard is one that makes music for the sake of it, for the joy of creation and the amazement found in the art of it all. This bard reminds me of the College of Prismari on the School of Strixhaven. For that, I tend to think of this quote to describe the red-blue bard from the card Prismari Apprentice. No one ever created great art by playing it safe. If you want to play this type of bard, you have to be willing to see all of your hard-earned progress swept up and away with your passions. You are excitable and enjoy each new spell song you add to your repertoire, for if you don't gain something from your own songs, well, then what's the point? As we can see from these four versions of the bard, red is often at its core, as no matter the style, it does take charisma and passion to be a bard. Where the interesting skew comes from are the other colors that are paired with it. In green, it can utilize the echoes of creation to pass on ancient wisdom, to tap into magic that is pure and old. With white, it uses those songs to inspire others. It sees its role as one who uplifts a new generation of heroes and aims to be right there at their side when their song is written. The blue side of the bard takes to mastering its craft above all else. I can honestly see this color in the bard almost as much as I can see the red within it, as it takes more than a love of music to be a bard. You must be skilled and dedicated, and that's why there are so few true magical bards in existence. Finally, black adds a level of personal satisfaction and gain to the bard, and grants it the allowances that make getting its hands dirty a little bit easier. This type of bard would fit in with the rogues, or within the king's court, where manipulation is key. However you play your bard, it's really up to you. What's important is that you hold on to the passion that makes performance what it is, as what's a bard without an audience? Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video. The Artificer is a class who applies its intelligence to circumvent traditional means of magic. This focus allows it to infuse basic items into magical ones, craft potions of varying potency, create mechanical monstrosities of destruction, utilize a range of tools for every job, or even express its own version of a magical Iron Man. While its range of focus can seem very broad, it does indeed carry one core throughput, and that is its ingenious and creative mind. With a focus on its intelligence stat, the Artificer is truly unlike most other classes. all while being able to mimic some of the effects of others. In some ways, it can be a ranger who crafts a pet instead of tames one. It can be a paladin who uses power armor instead of holy power. Or it can be a mage with a gun. This is why this class can either be divisive or exciting, depending on your playgroup. That said, if you can find a way to mix technology into your campaign, there is a lot of fun that can be had with the versatility of this class, not to mention the unique flavor it provides. Now that we have an idea of the class formed in our minds, it's time we move on to the core color of the class. As I said at the top, the core color is the one color you will most often associate with the class. The best way to start this discussion is to actually look to Wizards of the Coast, who created class cards for each of the classes in D&D. In the sets Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and more recently in the set Commander Legends, Battle for Baldur's Gate. The latter being where we will find the class card for the Artificer. Pulling up the card, we can see that they decided on blue for its core color, and I don't think it's much of a surprise that I agree with this choice. Being one of the few classes to have intelligence as its core stat, and having this class base all of its abilities off its inventive creations, it's a color which fits perfectly. Blue is the color of those who put learning, self-improvement, and the application of their intelligence first. For me, this just checks all of the boxes for the Artificer. That said, the magic of character creation comes into play once we start to apply more colors to it. So let's do just that and create 3 characters as an example for you to hopefully spark some inspiration for your next design. To begin, I'm going to add both white and red to the equation. Our first character might seem young for an adventuring artificer at only 15, and yet their mind is far past what others would consider intelligent at a greater age. A bit of a young genius, this character outgrew their simple life and desired instead to make more of themselves, all with the aid of their explosive and dangerous machinations. This character set out to find a party with similar values as a way to put to use its skills and craftsmanship, as they always felt the strong urge to help others with their abilities. Sure, most of what they create has a habit of blowing up or blowing other things up, but it's just a matter of finding the right equation or application. Even at a young age, they would get into altercations with bullies, but because of their smaller stature, were unable to do much about it. Because of this, they leaned into their natural talents, and a chance encounter with an older artificer led them down the path they are on now. Being a younger artificer with above average skill does lead them to become overconfident in themselves, thinking they can craft machines which are far above their skill level. This sometimes ends with explosive results, but half the fun of science is in the experimentation. With grease on their hands, soot in their hair, and hope in their heart, they finally find an adventuring party who complements their needs to help others. From here, I want to look at the colors present in this character to understand more about them. Let's start with white. White, in the case of this character, leans less into its desire for order and more into its selfless side. We see that this character just wants to help lift others up and utilize the tools at its disposal to do so. They would rather blow themselves up in an invention gone wrong than see others stepped on. Then there is their blue side. In the case of this character, blue is the desire for iteration and learning. This character has great latent talent, but is eager to learn more, and setting off on an adventure is just another way to accomplish this. Finally, we have red, which reflects its young and experimental mindset, with a tendency to focus on inventions which provide explosive yet exciting results. Alright, with that covered, I want to start our next character, and for them I want to shed both red and white, and then add in black to show you another extreme of the Artificer. Our next character stands in stark contrast to our previous one. This one, who is focused on blue-black, is not an inventor for the people, but rather one who is solely in it for themselves. Their motivations are not selfless, but rather self-fulfilling through total ambition. The Artificer's craft for them is simply a tool to reach peak perfection. They believe that there is only so far the human mind and body can go, and it's through augmentation that they can reach the heights they feel they deserve. Everything they do is an act to further this end. Sure, they will join your party, but to them, the party is yet another tool in its arsenal to gain further heights. This mindset and application have led them to heavily augment themselves, replacing their weak, fleshy limbs for mechanical ones, which are infused with magical properties. They do not craft for others, but rather for themselves. Think of it as a steampunk transhumanist, and then you'll start to have a picture formed in your mind of this character. To really understand this character though, I think we have to get right into the colors to understand their motivations, starting with blue. Blue is the color of self-improvement and, in extreme cases, self-perfection. When a person takes on this trait fully, they see no end in the ways that they can improve themselves, becoming something of an endless obsession. It's as if they see their own body as yet another machine to tinker upon. We see this with the character's desire to replace its weak flesh for augmented machinery. Then there is black, the color of ambition. In most cases, it will do whatever it deems necessary to reach for the positions in life it feels it deserves. So, as you can see, when these two colors get together, something drastic happens. Perfection and ambition, when combined, is a deadly trait, and nothing will stop this person from reaching the goals they have set out for themselves. For our final character, I want to shed black and add in green to show that even this rare color can be used for the Artificer. The core idea at the heart of this character concept is the sentiment that alchemy is the bridge between nature and science. Alchemy is then the unnatural application of natural things. And this idea is what sparks inspiration within the heart of our character. They feel as if they are split between two worlds, two minds. One in which they were raised and the other in which they see themselves. As a child, they were brought up to be a druid, but could never get a grasp on the higher concepts, or that of true magic. Their mind was a practical one, perhaps clinically so. They had trouble interacting with others or leaning into concepts which were not grounded in easily proven fact. Their parents often said that they took things too literally, but to this character, that was a compliment. They appreciated the world in which they were raised, they felt a connection to the plants and purpose within, but once again that purpose was only half fulfilled. There was something more for them out there. To truly find themselves and be who they knew they were, they had to depart from the forest in favor of the city. It was here among the hustle and bustle where they found a teacher for their craft, an artificer master, but more importantly, an alchemist. Being someone who was raised in the wood, alchemy was the perfect fit. They had the base knowledge required and the mindset in place. They would spend their time concocting potions of varying effects from sunup until sundown. Years passed in this way, and finally their master had taught them all they could teach. It was time for our character to set off on adventure. This is where your party encounters them. From here, let's discuss the colors which are present in this character to learn more about them. Firstly, we have blue, the color who can be analytical to a fault, perhaps not grasping at social cues at times. They tend to spend a lot of time in their own head. The mind of a blue character is a clinical one, and things which can't be grasped by logical means can sometimes leave them feeling unsatisfied. On the other side of it, we have green, which is its tie to nature. But more importantly, it reflects their desire to find their true purpose. Green is the color who desires a meaning for its life. It wishes to find where it fits and then be of service in that realm. When combined with blue, this means that their purpose was being that bridge between nature and science, bringing pure applications to nature. They knew they were of two worlds, and they had to find that spot between to truly be themselves. Now that we've built these characters, I find it's important to go over each color in regards to the Artificer. That way you can mix and match whatever colors you wish and build a character you're proud of. Let's start at the top of the color pie with white. In the case of an Artificer, this color embodies one who wishes to use their tools and inventions to lift others up. They see the deficits in humanity and know that they can patch those up if they're clever enough. Then there's blue, the core color of the class. We don't really need to get into this color as we've seen many sides of it during our character discussion. So let's move on to black. Black is the color of self-satisfaction and ambition. An Artificer with black present sees itself as better than others because of its craft, just as white will cause them to lift others up, while black has a more selfish effect on the Artificer. The black-aligned Artificer uses their tools to bring themselves wealth, glory, and power. Standing beside black is red, the color of expression, and in this case it is the reckless expression facilitated through invention and creation. Why bring your ideas to life if you're not going to have fun doing it? This Artificer might create magical items which have little application besides being fun, or they may prefer to just see things explode. Finally, there is green, a color I would admit is rarely seen in the Artificer, but is possible. In many ways, a class who leans into unnatural creations is the antithesis of green, but there are many faces to green which can be applied, not just nature. Concepts like tradition, purpose, and destiny can always be applied to any character, and such is the case with the Artificer. One thing to keep in mind with the Artificer is that it's a class whose motivations can be felt all the way through into its creations. So be sure to reflect why they create into what they create, and through that you will be able to build a more interesting and robust character in the process. The Barbarian is a class who needs little introduction, their image burned into our minds from our first sightings of the classic art of Frank Frazetta, and has persisted ever since. In Dungeons & Dragons, we are handed a class with one defining feature: rage. It is a class who rushes headlong into battle, all eyes on them as they cleave down their enemy. It's no surprise then that the Barbarian can feel like a one-note class, with every mechanic revolving around rage and being too angry to die. The truth, though, is that this isn't something that should hinder role-playing. There's actually a lot of room here to create a complex character. For that, we can look to the many potential sources and reasons for this rage. And when we do that, our options on how to create and play this class open up quite a bit. You see, rage does define the Barbarian, and yet rage in this context isn't as simple as getting angry in battle. If this was the case, there wouldn't be so many grand tales about this class, with all of their flaws and heroic deeds aching to be told. So let's begin working out how we will be crafting our own memorable stories, starting with the core color of the class. For those unfamiliar, the core color is the color or set of colors you will most often associate with the class when building them, as there are always some colors that are so thematically resonant they cannot be ignored. To start, we will look to the class color chosen by Wizards of the Coast in Magic the Gathering. Pulling up the card, we can see that they have chosen red as the core color, and really it's not much of a surprise, as it's the color of raw emotion, rage being one such emotion. But you know what? Even though this is a perfect color as a core class, I don't think this is the whole picture. There is another color that I would like to add, as what I would like to call an alternative color. You see, the Barbarian and green also have quite a bit in common, at least in certain builds. Think of the Totemic Barbarian, one whose rage comes from an animal spirit. Even if you don't go down that route, the Barbarian is often a wild figure who finds the cluster of city life and man-made order to be a hindrance. In this way, both red and green work together or apart very well and describe the core of this class. Now, the only true way to understand how this will work will be to see it in action. So let's put together 3 barbarians with the color pie as our guide. And make sure to stay tuned till the end, as we will go over each color individually. That way you have the tools to mix and match and build your own barbarian as you like. Now, to begin, I do want to use that red, but add in black to understand what kind of barbarian we get with these colors. The sound of the battlefield can be the truest song of horror, but to a few it can be music to their ears. In the case of this character, it is the latter. You might think that this would make for a character who is brutal, twisted, or sadistic, but the truth lies somewhere else. The fact is that this character absorbs every experience they can, and rushes into it head on. When in town, they can be found in the tavern, singing songs and gathering a circle of onlookers around them. When they're in a dungeon, all they wish to do is push deeper and deeper, curiosity driving them to uncover everything the site holds. Any dangers be damned. Then yes, when it comes to battle, they bare their chest, brandish their weapon, and let out a battle cry. To them, life is short and must be experienced to its fullest. Every drink a chance to have fun, every dungeon a chance for adventure, and every battle a story to be told of their greatness. What makes this character interesting, though, is the reason behind their outlook. You see, they weren't always this way. Once they were weak, scared, and sickly, their body ready to betray them, not destined to see the age of 10. Even their parents had given up hope on them. Then, one day, at the age of 7, something snapped in them. They weren't going to lay down and die, to accept whatever it was that made their life a struggle. So one day at a time, they would leave their bed, force their body into motion, and exercise until it would collapse. Every day was still a struggle, but the anger over their situation pulled them out of bed each day. Over time, it became easier and easier as their body became stronger and stronger. They held on to that anger that helped them rise each day, to resist death. Eventually 10 came and went, and they were still there. Then 15, then 20. It's as if they refused to die. They felt they had a new lease on life, and sitting around in some village wasn't going to cut it anymore. There was a world out there to be experienced. By this time, their body was strong, and so they set out for adventure, vowing to make sure they would live like every day was their last. For this character, we went with red and black, a color combination that thrives in experiences. In this case, the black side pushed this character to not give up, to not accept the hand it was dealt, and red, the tool of rage that pushed them to reject it. Combined, it bred someone who thrives in living their life to the fullest, one who never looks back. For our next character, I want to drop the black and red, then add in white and green to craft a character from opposing colors. Far outside any city gates, in parts of the land barely tamed, lives a clan, one whom the outside world has deemed as savages. It may be true that they do not live in the ways that the rest of the world has progressed to, yet they can trace their lineage back hundreds of years, proud in their history, their names spoken of in many tales. There are those who have tried to put them to heel, but none have succeeded, as they are a strong people of great warriors. Each and every one of them battle-hardened in their own right, steeped in a tradition of combat. It's because of this that when the king passed away and a successor was to be crowned, it was not a decision made by simply handing down the role to the eldest, but rather the strongest of their children. In this way, 3 siblings had to fight for the position, one they all coveted dearly. Our character was among the 3. Youngest of them, they had a lot to live up to. They had trained with the elder axemen nearly every day, engrossed themselves in the stories of kings past and their victories. When the day came, though, they still were no match for their elder brothers, both battle-hardened and ready for such combat. In the end, the middle child ended up taking the crown, leaving our character disappointed in themselves, feeling as if they had failed their father and those that had gone before them. Through it all, though, they congratulated their brother on the win, bowed in respect, and told him that they must leave to find their strength and harden themselves with experience. This is where their adventure begins. Let us now break down this character's colors to better understand their motivations. Starting with green. As you can see, we used it instead of red. In this case, the green represents their proud lineage and traditions. This extends to the mechanical rage. You see, rage in this context is passed down from the many great warriors through a fighting style that has persisted in the clan since its earliest days. Never written down, but passed down orally and physically. It's something bred into each person and has allowed them to crush any invaders who wish to tame their people. White in this case is the character's sense of duty and their motivation to earn a place in their clan. While they hold no ill feelings towards their brother and accept him as king, they do wish to gain more experience so that they can return and be the hero they envision themselves to be. Now, for our next character, I want to use both of our core colors at the same time to craft a rather wild barbarian. There are those that reject civilization outright, those who find the confines of an ever-encroaching wall as the killer of one's soul, those who would rather sleep in a bed made of branches than one of down and feather, those who would rather listen to the call of an eagle than the song of a human. Such is the case for our final character. As a child of only 12, they were left in a forest, abandoned by their parents for what they could no longer remember. The first nights were cold, but not as cold as their parents had been to them, and so there was some comfort found in this place. They learned to survive rather quickly, no simple child of the city. At least they had some experience in making a fire, creating rudimentary shelter, and finding food. Life was not easy, but they made it work. Through mimicking the patterns of the animals and honing their body, they became accustomed to their environment. Soon, they could not imagine living anywhere else. This time in the wilderness among the animals created a near mythical bond between them and their environment, and after a while they felt more like the beasts than the human they claimed to be before. This closeness allowed them to commune with the animals and to take on the aspects of the spirits which represented them. Strong as a bear, cunning as a wolf, and agile as an eagle, they made this place their home, a tranquility found in wilderness. The silence was eventually broken when they came across a party of adventurers, a dire mission in tow. This is where a character's story begins. Let us now discuss the colors that shape them. In this case, it's a true merger of colors, a philosophy bred from their pairing. When these two colors come together, it can be a true case of instinct and a connection to the more primal side of our humanity. Not denying the impulses that guide us, while also listening to the instincts granted to us. What's more is that this character is able to stay focused in the moment, finding their bearings and trusting themselves, creating a character who moves with the tides, following the path laid out by nature. Now that you've seen 3 examples, I would like to lay out each of the 5 colors and discuss them in the context of the barbarian. That way you have the base tools to mix and match to create your own. If you'd like to know more about each of the 5 colors and all of their combinations, then worry not, I have a video for each one over on my channel. Okay, let's begin with the color white. White in this case represents a barbarian who feels bound by some sense of duty to their friends or family. It's a smaller circle than white traditionally clings to, but still is present in these terms. It can also be a barbarian who puts its body on the line for others, a heroic version of the class that truly stands up for the weak, as if they were granted such strength for a reason beyond themselves. Then there is the blue barbarian, an odd case for sure, as we didn't even cover one in our examples. A blue barbarian can denote one who is more of a sage outside of battle. They're contemplative and quiet, opting for meditation and self-reflection, yet something flips in combat, almost like the dichotomy between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Then there is black. This color works quite well for a barbarian, in that such a strong presence can often be an arrogant one, a class driven by an ego. Next is one of our core colors, red. Truly, this color needs little introduction in the case of the barbarian. It is fury, plain and simple, a raw driving force that sheds any forethought in favor of action. That leads us into our other core color, green, a color who grants a deeper reason for that rage. In this case, it's something provided by nature, an ancient tradition, or any other long-standing force you wish to draw from. As you can see, you can draw from any one of the colors of the color pie, and with a bit of additional research, you can craft a barbarian all your own, one that comes to life with the color pie as your guide. At the heart of the cleric is one core truth. It is the class of piety, the class that looks to a higher power for answers, and because of these aspects, it fits perfectly into the color chosen by Wizards of the Coast, and that is white. You might think that white is the core color because of its healing powers, or because it helps the weak and heals the injured, but that is not the reason why we will be choosing white, because as you may already know, the cleric is so much more, and at times, it's none of those things. So let's break down why white works as a core color for this class with this in consideration. White is the color that is always looking externally for answers, whether that be through laws, kings, angels, or in this case, deities. In some ways, white is like its neighbor green, in that it believes in a bigger purpose outside of itself, just that to green, this idea is more abstract, and to white, it is something quite tangible. Therefore, we see religion most often in white, a moral guide which it can mold its life around. Every setting in D&D is populated with many gods, and fulfilling their wishes becomes a tangible way of life for some. The cleric in this way becomes the literal right hand of a god, extending its influence on the masses and exacting its will in real ways. As you can begin to see, no matter the domain, this is the one common thread. They could enact the will of death, of trickery, of war, and yet there would often be white, the mechanism of piety and of laws bigger than one's self. Now that we have an understanding and a base to start with, I want to begin the fun part of the video, where we will build 3 characters using the color pie to help inspire you when it comes to making your own cleric. For our first character, we will be adding green and red to see what comes from this combination. For this cleric, I want to paint a picture of what led them to this class and the domain in which their god falls under. That way you can understand what led them to now stand as a white, green, red cleric. In this instance, we have a character who at a young age loved the sea, and as soon as they were old enough, they joined a merchant ship as a deckhand. It was a tough life, but they loved every minute of it. That is, until one day the ship ran into a violent storm. While many hid below deck, our protagonist fought tooth and nail to keep the ship on course. But eventually, the storm won. The ship was destroyed and none survived, that is, except for our future cleric. They had spent the entire night gripped tightly to a piece of wood and managed to resist the waves which threatened to pull them under. When morning finally came and the sun rose over the sea, our character found themselves washed against a shore. They spent the next year alone on an island, adamant that they had lived for a reason, and that a god of the Tempest domain had smiled upon them. They spent that year alone praying to this god and swearing their loyalty to them. When they were finally rescued, they devoted themselves to this god by becoming a cleric. They now watch over vessels their god deems worthy to traverse those very same seas. Their ability to tap into nature's raw forces of sky and sea are a boon to any ship, and the courage our cleric displays inspires those who fear the threat of open water. Let's talk about the colors present here to gain more insight into our character. White, as we have already covered, is the piety and the total selflessness regarding its devotion to their god. Green, in this case, is the respect and admiration of nature's will. Sure, most of the time when we think of green, we picture lush forests, but it's also a reverence for both sea and sky. It is the majesty of everything nature provides, and a willingness to follow its examples instead of bending it to its will. Red, in this case, is courage instead of fear. It is the heart and soul of the sea and the fury of its storms. The colors all come together to craft a character who enacts the will of their god on behalf of those deemed worthy. It is of someone who inspires courage in others by standing firm in the storm's fury. They do not waste any time on those who are weak, and those whose actions would spoil that very water they wish to traverse. Those who ferry slaves or make their coin through pirating are not worthy, and must be dealt with in kind. For our next example, I would like to drop both green and red, and add blue to learn what kind of cleric is bred from these colors. Knowledge is the building block of any great civilization, and to this cleric, the gathering of that knowledge is their primary purpose, thus landing them squarely at the side of one of the gods found in the knowledge domain. This gathering of knowledge is the basis for most of their adventures. They will routinely go out into the world to gather lost knowledge, diving deep into lost catacombs, ancient towers, and defiled dungeons. It is on these quests for knowledge that you may gather this cleric into your party. Their understanding of history, lost languages, and supporting magics are a boon to any team. The only requirement is that they get the first dibs on any of the books or important relics of the past. The colors present within this cleric complement this type of character. White is ever present in two ways. For one, it is the purpose granted by a higher power, a calling to help others through the sharing and gathering of knowledge on their god's behalf. The other side of it is the idea of serving to make a better world for all. Its libraries are open to the people, and this cleric hungers to share what they have learned with them. They have a respect for the past and can help build a better future in turn. For education for all is the basis for creating that better world. As you can see, this is strongly tied to blue as well, as a perfect world is one where self-improvement and learning are at the forefront. It is also the hunger to learn that is at the heart of blue, which is ever present in this cleric. It is more than simply fulfilling its god's wish. It's also a natural desire to learn, to discover, and to find what is hidden. In the end, the combination of white and blue present in this cleric is the idea of creating a better world through the gathering and sharing of knowledge on their god's behalf. Next, I want to flip the cleric on its head and talk about a version of the cleric who extends the hand of death by dropping blue from the mix and adding in black and green. The motivations behind our next cleric are based in the realms of death and a unique understanding of it. When our cleric was a child, they lost their mother in a horrible accident. This crushed our character, but odd things began to happen only 2 weeks later. They began hearing a voice in the night, a very familiar voice. Soon, even stranger things began to happen, culminating in a night that would change the course of their life. They were visited by the apparition of their lost mother. She wore a kind smile instead of that face of sorrow which was imprinted in his mind. He spoke with his mother at length before she left, and he never saw her again. This evening brought peace to our cleric, and from that day forward they realized that death was not the end, but rather a new beginning. Once this character became of age, they left in search of the temple of a particular god of death, a place where they could learn more about the truth behind that death. What they came to learn was that death was as natural as any process. The only issue arose when the dead did not want to move on because of some unfinished business, or of those whose death breeds a creature of malice. This character then aims to either bring peace to the dead and allow them to continue with their journey, or to vanquish those foul creatures who haunt the night. The motivations behind this cleric are centered on placing themselves in between death and life, as a facilitator guiding those lost souls where they need to go. So how do these colors reflect this cleric? In this case, I want to start with green, as I believe it's at the heart of this version, more so than white, as green sits in an interesting place when it comes to death, and often white can resist it. In the context of our cleric, it is the perspective granted to them by their god, an outlook that views death as the one constant and nothing to fear. We simply must abide by it and move on once the bonds which tie us to this place are loosened. Both white and black play an interesting role here though, almost intertwined in this case. With both colors present, we have the application of judgment. Those spirits who cause chaos are swiftly removed from existence, while those who simply need help to move on are aided with a kind hand, creating a character who sees the world in absolutes. As we can see, many colors fit within the cleric, and it's more a matter of their upbringings, motivations, and of course the god they serve, all coming together. Remember though, the god or their domain doesn't come first. Ask yourself about what motivates your character, and the domain will follow suit. Think of it more as a way of enhancing your character. So let's talk about each color and see how they shape the cleric. That way you will have a better understanding of how to build your cleric using the color pie. White is the obvious choice. As we have learned earlier, it fits so well with the cleric that I will declare it the core color, the color you will most often see in a cleric. Let's reiterate why that is. White is the color of piety, of having purpose handed down. A cleric with white in their combination believes they serve their god as an extension of their will, and in doing so, enhancing their god's truth. Next is blue, a color of perfection, knowledge, and learning. A color that might indeed fall under very specific clerics, but nonetheless adds a great deal to the ones they are applied to. Your blue cleric will be one who acts to better not just themselves, but the world around them. And if they do not bow to a specific god, their intentions would be unchanging. It's just that now their purpose is so much more grand. Then there's black, a color you might not think would fit the cleric, and yet is a color that complements actually many different clerics. Sure, black can be selfish, and following a god can be outside of this, but there is more to black than that. Sometimes it's more of an outlook they share with their deity. What I mean is that they could find what their god says to ring so true with them on a personal level that they devote their lives to them. Black is willing to be a follower if who they follow complements and empowers them, and they also respect those beings who do not back down, ones who demand respect. Next up we have red, a color I personally love for the cleric because red is passion and it's the expression of will, and nothing brings this out stronger in someone than a person with a higher calling. This can turn a cleric fanatical, courageous, and inspiring. Finally, there is green, a color that could replace white's devotion if you want a different spin. In this way, green brings out the ancient gods and their worshippers. It is a respect for the wild and of the bigger picture. A green cleric follows their heart, not because of simple piety, but because they have an understanding of the ancient forces that are at play all around us. Now, as you can see, the cleric can be quite diverse. There is no need to label them as simple heal bots anymore. They can be sailors turned speakers of the sea. They can be scholars who raise a book as well as a hammer, or they can be agents of death, ferrymen between each plane of existence. However you choose to build your cleric, I just want you to be sure that you put their motivations first and ask this question: what god would my character choose based on their personality and motivations, and not the other way around? And if you do that, I'm sure you'll be able to create more interesting and dynamic characters because of it. Normally, I would add in some fanfare and leave a bit of mystery before we discuss the core colors of the class in question. I would typically give some hints and then finally reveal the card. But in this case, I believe we have a class which is so fully its core color that you probably came into the video with it in mind already. So let's not waste any time and show that card so we can discuss why it's the perfect core color for the Druid, as we can still gain a lot from setting up a base understanding of the themes of this class. Pulling up the card, we can see that, to no one's surprise, Wizards of the Coast has chosen green for the class colors of the Druid. Let's discuss why this works so well. For one, the parallels begin where both the Druid and green both pull inspiration for their philosophies, that is, from nature. Green looks to the examples that nature has set forth before us to build its view of the world around it and its place within. This is the same motivation that drives the Druid. In nature, the animal kingdom can be an analog for how we should live our own lives, in that we must accept both the cruel and the harmonious aspects of existence. We must take into consideration the balance of nature and its slow growth with no wasted steps. We need not complicate what it is we were meant to do, and respect that each person and creature within an ecosystem has a role it was set on this earth to accomplish. And in that way we can find our purpose. Green also has respect for the past, as progress without thought damages the fabric of that perfect ecosystem, one that has lasted for millennia and a millennia before. In that way, the Druid and green both respect traditions and the old ways, as they are a roadmap we can use to find our place and our purpose. As you can see, the parallels between green's core ideologies and that of the Druid are nearly one for one. And as a first for this series, I would say no other color truly captures this better. Now, of course, we can add to this single color to bring in more nuanced motivations to our character, and that's just what we'll do. But I would be remiss to say that you could do away with green in the case of the Druid. I believe its touch will often be felt. So let's begin adding that complexity now and build 3 Druids to see how the addition of other colors creates a more gripping character. To start, we will simply be adding in white to learn how the addition of one of green's neighbors is a great fit for the Druid. Just as a rogue finds allies in a guild or a wizard finds like minds in a school, the Druid gains community often through a circle of similarly motivated forest dwellers. In the case of our green-white Druid, they were raised in such circumstances, their parents being core members of such a circle. It was in this way of life that they learned the rituals of the old faith, the spells that helped the land grow, and the laws that govern everything around them. These Druids keep the ancient ways alive while tending to the woods they call home. This form of the Druid takes a lot of inspiration from the classic Druids of our own plane of Earth, folks who reject the falsehoods of a civilized world, opting instead to become an extension of nature through rituals and maintenance. They don't push into foreign lands to occupy. No, they grasp onto a piece of land which holds some ancient significance, and allow it to be the place where the true magic that binds reality can maintain its power. Looking to our character who fits within this way of life, we see a person who is devoted to a role. As we said at the top, green understands that harmony is maintained when each piece of the puzzle that is nature acts out its role. This purpose is what drives much of this character. Of course, you are playing a game and you would want to set them off on an adventure, and this sedentary lifestyle would have to be disrupted. To add to this motivation, you would need to introduce some external force, which either destroys their home or forces them to set off to retrieve something. A mission which sends them on a path to setting something right, which has broken the timeless flow of itself or its people. This aspect is up to you, but remember, if this character could, they would stay as they are forever, and something must happen to force them to abandon their home. Let's take a closer look at the colors of this druid before we move on. I won't get into the green side of it this time, as I believe this has already been well established in what we have covered so far. I want to instead answer how white adds complexity to this character's base of green. In the case of this character, white adds a devotion to the core ideals of the druidic way of life. Yes, green on its own provides purpose, yet it's more loosely defined. White, in this instance, facilitates a complete sense of purpose driven by devotion to a cause, in that the rituals themselves take on an almost religious twist. The Old Faith, as it's called, may differ from circle to circle, and yet it remains a way of looking at the world around you, something to devote yourself to. White is primed for religion, and in turn can take this idea of the Old Faith of devotion to nature and push it farther into that direction, creating a druid who's something of a cleric of the wood. With that first character covered, I believe you're starting to see what adding colors does for the druid, but I don't want to settle on this idea. What about the druid who lives their life by claw and tooth? What of the black, red, green druid, or Jund druid? What motivates them? At the top, I stated that green accepts both the harmony and cruelty of nature, and in this case we push further into the latter with the black, red, green druid. Not in that it's cruelty for its own sake, but instead one that allows the vicious side of a predator to flow through it, to the extent that it physically becomes said predator. The druid who aligns itself with the circle of the moon is an extension of the animal kingdom, and everything that comes along with it. I would resist saying it's for good or bad though, as the druid doesn't deal in such black and white absolutes. Instead, it's the truth of nature, and that nature does what it must to survive, to continue on. So how did our druid in this case come to be? Well, unlike our previous example, they were not so lucky to be raised by druids, but instead were abandoned by unloving parents to die in the forest at the age of only 4. Nature can be cruel, of course, and on another day that might have been the end of the story, but it can also be kind. Left to fend for itself, the child wouldn't last long, but lucky for them, a direwolf mother took pity on the kid and brought it into their own family to raise the cub along with her own. It was here that the child grew into an adult, one who understood the truths of nature, where the only law is survival. To them, it was humanity who was truly cruel, those who clear-cut forests, kill without reason, and abandon their own children. In time, this character becomes more than one small member of a wolf pack. They gain the favor of the spirits of the wood, and it is them who pass on its secrets, the magic that binds reality, and of the true forms one can take, forms which brought it closer to the animals it felt kinship with, of the wolves that raised it, the owls that watched over its bed at night, and of the stout bears who it foraged alongside. Let us now inspect the colors present in our character to better understand its motivations. Black in this way is the understanding of the cruel realities of not just nature, but the world around them. Being abandoned showed them the indifference of life that can be common in humanity, and surviving in the wilds taught them that the predator is a valid piece of the circle of life. Truly, it is survival of the fittest. This does not mean unnecessary suffering, but instead the truth that binds all things. Next is red, a piece of the puzzle that guides us, the instincts and impulses which show us our true nature, and in following this, you will never be led astray. Finally, we have green, the color that binds this all together in the aforementioned ways we have previously discussed. The black-red-green druid is one who is both predator and protector with a natural balance. Now, I want to shed black and add in blue to shift our druid in a completely different direction. Nature isn't always the tangible woods and creatures within. It's also the fabric of reality that sits behind the one we perceive. It is the unseen forces like gravity, or in this case, the bridge between the dream and our own experience, that of tangible illusion. There are realms which sit in this space between, of the Feywilds and other dreamlike realms. This is where the green, blue, red druid bases its magic and motivations from. There is an inherent kindness and playfulness that comes from druids who follow this path, and such is the case with our green, blue, red druid. How our druid came to this circle is lost to time, as their longer life afforded to them by being a druid, mixed with that of its odd perception of time, make it hard to imagine the how of how they came to this path. They faintly remember a child who would explore alone under starry nights, one who ran from its problems, that is, until it found the answer in the company of playful fae. This child was taught the power of the dream, and the power of those places found in rest and play. The memories are only passing images though, and our character isn't even sure if it's them they see. It could just be another dream conjured forth. Whatever the case, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is where it is now, the friends it's made along the way. I want to go deeper into this character, but it's difficult with such an aloof basis, and so I think we should get into the colors of this character to build our understanding. This time I do want to start with green, as I believe it has different attributes in this version of the druid. Green, in the case of this druid, is the attachment to the world within and without our own, of forces found in odd places which make up our reality or unreality. It's a different side of green that we often don't think of, even though it's in places like these where green can find its purpose. Next is blue. For this druid, blue represents the manipulation of reality, or the creation of wonderful acts. Manipulation doesn't have to be a negative term in this context. It's simply an understanding of the mysterious forces hidden around every corner, and the application of its findings, something very blue. Finally, there is red, the color who takes on a pretty large driving role, at least in the way that the druid interacts with those around it. Red, in the context of this character, is the playfulness that is required to truly live in these spaces, and to be even approached by a fae. This time around, we managed to use each of the 5 colors, yet they fell into different contexts. This is great in that it displays how a color can change when paired with others, or when focused on different motivations. That said, I do think it's best we talk about each of the colors and their relationship with the druid. That way you can start piecing your own druid together, the colors that interest you most. Let's start at the top of the color pie with white. White, in the case of the druid, can go in 2 ways. For one, it can add structure or community to the druid. This druid may be less likely to be a total hermit. On the other side of it, white is also its connection to the old faith, and in keeping it alive. It's also the maintenance of balance, not harmony in the way of green, but balance. No one thing should overtake the other, lest the balance of nature be toppled. Then there is blue, a common color in magic type classes, but with the druid it's for different reasons than study or mastery. Blue can be the druid's connection with the underlying mysteries of nature, and the desire to understand them. Remember, there are forces which are part of nature which sit on top or behind our own reality, and it takes the right kind of mind to grasp at such concepts. Next up is black. This color, when present in the druid, provides a realistic outlook. It ties closely to the food chain, predator and prey, and of survival of the fittest. Also, this druid is very protective and accepts no trespassers on its land or outsider aggression. Black will fight for its territory till its last breath. The 4th color is red, a color of impulse, a neighbor of instinct. Red can take many forms, but is common in both the animal and the human world. It can be aggression or it can be joy and play. It really depends on where your druid is focused. Finally, we have green, a color so intertwined with the druid that I could hardly justify its removal. I don't think there is much that needs to be said about this color, as this is the one case where describing the color would simply be describing the class. If you want to know more about each of the 5 colors, then be sure to watch my definitive series on the subject. Building a druid can be a complex thing. It may seem at first glance as simple class, but as we have learned, that's far from the truth. So have fun and get building. With the color pie as your guide, I'm sure your next druid will be a more robust and complex character. The fighter is a class whose focus is their martial prowess, and how their skill set can be utilized to achieve their goals. They aren't just some simple city guard or soldier, but rather someone whose prowess has allowed them to rise above such a paltry station. What is interesting as well is that combat is a skill that is one part training and the other part experience. You can't learn to be a fighter solely from reading a book or hitting some dummies. You have to test your blade. I think this does make the fighter unique from classes such as the wizard or the bard, and that those classes can gain power purely from study and practice, while the fighter must bloody its blade. The next thing to understand about the fighter is that its martial ability does not dictate the person they are or their motivations, but rather it is indeed the inverse. What I mean is that the character isn't the way they are because they are a fighter. Instead, they are a fighter because of the way they are. Most classes imprint themselves quite heavily onto your character, but really the fighter can range so drastically in motivations that it's not bound by its class. To truly understand what I mean, we must continue on by looking to the core color of the class chosen by Wizards of the Coast. Remember, the core color is the color you will most often associate with the class, and will tell us a lot about their core motivations. Pulling up the card, we see that they have chosen white-red. And while these are great colors for a fighter, I wouldn't exactly agree to their use as a core color. In fact, I'm going to do something I rarely do, and that is not only disagree with Wizards of the Coast, but state that the fighter should not even have a core color. You see, the fighter can represent each color equally because of what drives the class, and that is the character behind it. The fighter is in many ways an extension of your character, and not the reason for its being. They could be someone who fights for honor in a better world, or they could just as easily be a character whose intentions are selfish, with a simple desire to take what they want. They can be wild and violent, or they can be somber and reserved. There is no inherent motivations or temperaments defined by this class. Now, I know what I've said so far may leave you feeling like you have no provided direction, but this is actually the beautiful thing about the class, because it frees you up to create. Instead of making your character the way they are because of the class, you instead are free to craft a character who chose to be a fighter because of the way they are. With this in mind, I will build 3 characters for you. That way you can have some examples to work from that feature a range of personalities and backgrounds. Remember though, stay until the end, as at that point I will discuss each color individually in the context of the class. That way you can mix and match to create your own. In a small town rarely shown on any map lived a child who only seemed to draw attention from bullies. They always felt inadequate and weak, never able to truly stand up for themselves. This continued on until their teenage years, but it was then that a fire began to grow inside of them. They were no longer sad when thinking about their place, but rather they were angry. They were tired of being pushed around and forgotten. As soon as they were of age, they left to join the king's army, as they felt this was their only opportunity to become stronger and to prove themselves. They left town with no fanfare, not even their parents cared that they had left. The army was hard at first, but they took their new life as a way to start over, and instead of allowing themselves to be walked over, they replied to any transgression with anger. At first they were beaten for standing up, but eventually through training and experience they began to win fights. This built up their confidence, and they put everything they had into learning everything that they could about fighting. From blade and fist to bow and spear, they worked at it every day. Soon, no one crossed their path with ill intentions. The stronger and more skilled they got, the more their confidence grew, and the ways in which people were cautious in their presence gave them a rush. Months had passed, winter had come and went, and with spring the war horns were sounded. It was here where everything changed. They put their skills truly to the test and experienced their first taste of battle. The day was won, but they once again felt inadequate. So once they were back at camp, they spent as little time recouping as they could and went right back to training. Then the horn would be called once again and another battle would take place. This time they were ready, and in that day they made a hero of themselves. 2 years would go by in this way, until finally the war, in which he still barely knew the cause of, was over. What to do now, they thought to themselves. Should I return home and become a farmer, or should I see what else is out there for me? What new strengths I could gain, what new ways I could prove myself. Their hands, calloused and stained by blood, could no longer hold a tool or an embrace with a hug. No, they were forged to hold a blade, to fight. For this character, I created them with black and red in mind. That desire for power, to prove oneself, is all too black. The rage and the motivating emotions coming from their red side. These colors do not denote someone who is bloodthirsty per se, but rather someone whose emotions drove them into the frantic need to be the one who dictates their life. And in their mind, only through the gaining of more strength and recognition can they be the person they want to be. To drive themselves as far away from that scared, weak child as they could. For our next character, I will be dropping both of these colors, and instead craft one using white, blue, and green. In complete contrast, this character grew up in a place of privilege and prestige, part of a long lineage whose name was known across the region. This family prided themselves on creating some of the greatest generals and battle masters known through the land. In order to keep their position of prominence and neutrality, they would send their sons and daughters to become advisors of lords throughout the land. This, of course, has caused siblings to work against one another, but they are trained to always put their job first. For over 300 years this has gone on, and the family has remained a name set in reverence. This is the upbringing our character finds themselves in. Trained in all things of war in an academic manner, they are a skilled fighter and tactician. When it comes time to be sent to a lord as an advisor, this character begins to have second thoughts. They were a person with a kind heart, a hero deep down. They, above all else, wanted to use their training to help people, but felt that simply advising a lord in the ways of war would do little else but bring suffering to the common people. And that was not a life they wanted to live, or the person they wished to become. On the other hand, they adored their family's legacy, steeped in its traditions, and wore their crest with pride. On the night before they were to leave, they spoke with their mother about how they felt. Their mother listened, but told them in the end that they had a duty to fulfill, and that by sending a child to each lord, they were indeed helping keep balance. No one king would have a dire advantage, and that in the end, duty was stronger than any personal desire. Our character thought about their place all night, and knew they were trained and raised with this inevitability in mind, and so they left to fulfill their legacy. The next day, while they were on their way to meet with the King of the West, they encountered a village and decided to rest here, as the sun wouldn't stand in the sky much longer. While at the inn, they didn't get much rest, as they stood out among the farmers and merchants. The villagers told them of the raids that had taken place against their village, and how the king refused to send soldiers to deal with the bandit camp. Our character listened, but knew it was not their place to get involved. That is, until they spent the entire night thinking of ways they could help, and of how they could not move on knowing this was happening. So the next day they spoke with the village elder and gathered 10 of the most capable men and set out to put a stop to this. With this small contingent, our character was able to put all of their training to the test and remove the bandit problem. They felt so good about helping those in need and knew that this was their destiny. Much to the ire of the King of the West and their family, our character sent a letter stating that they would not be joining the king and instead would set out to find others they could help. They indeed feared what their decision would mean for them and their family, but they knew they had to put their abilities to good use, and serving some king was not the way. For this character, I went with Bant, and the correlation to each color is fairly evident here. For one, we have white. This represents the character's desire to help those that cannot help themselves. And in an interesting way, they cast off their duty in a form of self-sacrifice in order to do what's right. Then we have blue, which reflects their deep training and tactful mindset. They are the type of fighter who takes on the ways of battle in a scholarly manner. Finally, we have green, which in this instance is the deep traditions that define them. Sure, in the end they reject their born purpose, but that is not because they hate their family's traditions. No, they are proud of their lineage, but they do feel like their true purpose is elsewhere. With this character covered, I would like to create one more example, and to do so, we will drop both blue and green, but add in black to see what this means. Raised far from any normal situation a child might endure was our white-black character. They were taught in the ways of the samurai from the moment they could speak. They held a blade before they could walk, and they drew blood before they hit puberty. Trained and raised to be nothing more than a tool of their daimyo, our character was cold and efficient. They never questioned their mission or place in life. They would go out and kill those they were ordered to kill, go back to the castle they called home, and would wait for the next command. This lasted for many years, but as time dragged on, the daimyo grew more and more paranoid, and thus the missions became less and less about killing other warriors, and more about killing those that threatened their position. Then, one night at the age of 25, our character was sent on a mission that would change their life forever. An up-and-coming family would be the target of this night's mission. Our character cut their way through every samurai in their path, but once at the door and looking down at a scared family, our character stopped for the first time in their life. The children weeping, the parents holding them tight, this character caught a reflection of themselves as they walked forward, and for the first time in their life, they truly saw themselves for what they were, and didn't like what they saw. So, for the first time in their life, they did not complete their mission, but ran far away. Years have passed, and our character wanders, taking small jobs for those in need, only taking as much payment as that which will sustain them. They look to right the wrongs of who they were, all while their past never seems to let them go. For this character, I wanted to use white and black to showcase a fighter whose inner mind is a one of conflict. On one hand, they are trying to find a better path and do better for others, but they cannot deny who they are. They feel rotten from the inside, a demon deep within, represented by their black side. Part of themselves feels comfortable reverting back to their old deadly past, a life that had some semblance of order. Well, they want their future to be brighter, and so they struggle to become a hero rather than a villain. Now that you've seen the color pie applied to 3 potential characters, it's time we discuss how each of the colors can be used in the context of the fighter. That way you can have a better idea of how to apply the colors to a character of your very own. Like I said at the top, the fighter is a unique class, in that it really doesn't affect the colors as much as the colors affect the class. That said, there are reasons why our characters fight, so let's dive into that. To start, let's discuss white. In the case of the fighter who is white aligned, they can represent one who is selfless, one who raises its blade for others and uses their skills to defend the weak. In another way, it can be a fighter who's closer to a knight, one who's part of some order of warriors that defend a crown or country. In the end, white will be the color that places the intentions of this fighter into the hands of others. Next, we have blue. A blue-aligned fighter is one that practices the blade and everything to do with war and combat in an academic way. They see combat as something to be learned and understood, a problem that can be solved with more training and studying. They might seek out different styles and weapons in order to constantly have something new to master. Next is black, a color that is present in a fighter who uses their skills to take what they wish from life. They want glory and recognition. They are adventurers that seek out treasure and want their names spoken of in reverence across the land. This can be a heroic trait if it's not taken too far. In another way, black can represent a deadly and brutal way of fighting, a character who does not mind getting their blade bloodied. When we apply red to the fighter, something interesting happens. Its martial ability is in many ways a form of self-expression. Whether it be through rage or simply passion, the red-aligned fighter feels like their weapon is a part of them, and it's how they express themselves. Finally, we have green. In the case of this color, when applied to the fighter, it's representing themes of tradition. Typically, we see long lineages of a particular way of fighting passed down through many generations. This fighter is carrying on in this tradition as a form of duty or purpose. As you can see, the fighter is a rather dynamic class, one that is open in how it can be expressed and interpreted. This is honestly a beautiful thing, in that you're free to explore a wide variation of fighters. So go out and craft that fighter which reflects the kind of hero or villain you wish to become. From atop reclusive monasteries, men and women push the limits of their bodies through regimented training. The monk is a class defined by its attunement to its body and those of its opponents. By tapping into Ki, the life force that binds us all, it's able to achieve feats latent within. This ability does not come easily and requires immense dedication and discipline. It is not until the monk has spent a good portion of its life training that it's even able to begin making use of such abilities. With discipline and self-improvement so key to the core of this class, longtime viewers might already have an idea as to what the core colors of this class may be. But for those of you new to the series, the core color is the color or set of colors that represent the core themes and motivations of a given class. In other words, it's the color you will most often associate with them when building your character. Before I reveal my decision, I find it best to first look to the color or colors chosen by Wizards of the Coast in the class cards they made for each iconic D&D class. If we pull up the card, we see that they have chosen white-blue, and I'm inclined to agree. For one, the monk is a class that is defined by two factors, and those are discipline and self-improvement. With discipline being a major trait of white, and self-improvement being that of blue, it's a set of colors that can be hard to separate from this class. In that way, the monk is a class defined by what I would call mastery through discipline. Now, this selection does come with a caveat, and it's something I rarely put forth. I would say that white may be the weaker of the two, making it more of a supplementary core color, as you could argue that in some cases, green could even replace white. You see, the monk tapping into such a vital force such as Ki, as well as its roots in deep traditions, could indeed make for a good argument in regards to green. That said, blue is by far a strong color for the class. In that way, I would be remiss to say that you could refine the class to one core color, and that is blue, as the traits of blue are almost required for such a class. That said, if we are talking about the vanilla representation of the monk, I would argue that white and blue work very well as a pair. With this laid out, I find it best to then dive into 3 possible characters. That way you can see the monk built in varying ways, using the color pie and our core colors. To begin, I want to use the aforementioned core colors of white and blue, then add in red to learn what type of monk is built from these colors. In a small village on the outskirts of civilization lived our character. Only an infant at the time, they remembered little to nothing of their day-to-day, or the events that would transpire. Being more of a commune than a proper village meant that it had little defense against aggressors. This hadn't been a problem. But on one fateful night, that all changed. A roaming group of bandits came upon the village one cold night, and with little friction laid waste to it, killing indiscriminately, with almost a joy to their actions. When the sun finally rose on what was once a sleepy little collection of small wood houses, there was naught but blood and bodies strewn about. Not long after the chaos, a group of monks came upon the carnage, having come down from their monastery as they did every few weeks to ask for any supplies. Not ones to be overcome by emotion, they set straight away to help those that survived. That is when they came across our character, crying in a bed, their parents' bodies not far away. After the monks did all they could, they decided it best to take all the small ones into their care, in hopes of raising them away from such atrocities. Those villagers of age left their homes to find somewhere new to lay their hearth. It was from then on that our protagonist was raised among the monks and taught the lessons of their people. They learned to hone their emotions, attune their mind, and perfect their bodies. Of course, the truth couldn't stay dormant for long, and when this character came of age, they began to question their place among the order. They knew they must have come from somewhere else, that their bloodline lay somewhere outside of these walls, and while they cherished their home, they wanted to know the truth. After much discussion, the elder decided to lead those who came from the old village back to where their home once lay, buildings still sunken and destroyed. Upon learning of their origins and seeing the destruction, our character was unable to abide by their training and was filled with an anger they had long forgotten. How could something like this happen to such innocent people? And why did those that act out such darkness not pay for their crimes? Our character was unable to move on past this and decided to take what they had learned and use it to help others by inflicting justice. This is where their adventure begins, with anger in their heart, righteousness in their fists. Let's now break down the colors to understand how it shapes their motivations. White, in the case of this character, represents their strong sense of justice. They want to be the person that hands out punishment to the deserving. It's a desire to bring order and peace to a world where such darkness lies in every corner. Blue is then the representation of the core mastery at the heart of the class. And while it does not push their motivations per se, it is the color that allowed them to take their current form. Finally, red is the emotion that drives this character. Even through their decades of training and discipline, it's readily thrown away because there is that deep anger that's been present in them all along, as if the trauma of their youth has stuck with them, waiting to burst forth. They will act to direct this aggression towards those that do others harm, and this is their reason for their life as an adventurer. This character will always stand up for those that are downtrodden and will react with little thought when it comes to the sight of injustice. Now that we've completed our first example, I would like to create our next character. In this case, we will shed red and add in black to learn what this change does to a monk. At a young age, this character always managed to find trouble, or trouble seemed to find them. Fairly early in life, they got in with some bad kids and quickly found that a swift hand in a dark corner got them more in life than one that followed the straight and narrow ever did. That is, until trouble finally caught up with them. One night, they decided to break into the home of an old man, whom they thought was away to steal what they could. As it turned out, the man was home, and an altercation broke out. Our character can't quite recall exactly how things went down, but before they ran back out into the night, the old man was dead. The group argued among one another and finally decided to split up. Our character, burdened by what had just happened, kept running far outside of the city limits. They ran and ran, guilt pressing them forward. By the time they stopped, they were at the foot of a monastery. It was here they felt some calling. Either that, or it was the only place to hide. This character approached and was accepted. Through service and training, this character worked to atone for their actions, and in some way was able to move on from what had happened. That is, until trouble found its way into their presence once again. The master of the monastery pulled together a few of the young students. The selection seemed random, but there was a purpose behind it. It turned out the ones he gathered were all of the monks who had run from a troubled and shady past. He told them of the secret wing of their order, a dark order who used their skills for espionage on the behalf of the lord of the land. He asked if they wished to become part of this order, or return to serve the rest of their life in the traditional way. Our character thought long and hard, and in the end decided to take on this task. Even though they had reformed their ways, there was always this itch they couldn't scratch, this desire to put their deft hands to use. They missed crisscrossing through dark alleys, the moon their guide, and they knew with continued training in the shadowy ways of Ki, they could be so much more. They took the opportunity and decided that if trouble wanted to find them, then they would be ready this time. For this character, we settled on white, blue, and black, with the combination of white-blue denoting what we discussed in the core color section, that of mastery through discipline. Once this character found their new life, they did put all of themselves into it. At first, they used discipline as a way to punish themselves for their past, but found mastery in their efforts. Finally, there is black, which defines their amoral side. Even though they regret the actions that led to an unnecessary death, they do not think negatively on their time of crime. In fact, they miss the streets. Now they intend to find a new self in the skills they have mastered in the monastery. They're eager to lurk in the shadows and find meaning in it. Alright now, for our final character, I want to shed both white and black and go with blue and green instead, as a practice in leaning into one of the core colors rather than the other. The path to enlightenment isn't one only found through discipline. It can be a force unlocked through an understanding of natural forces, with a mind that's able to crack it. This is the case for our final character, an unconventional monk, only in classification, who studied the human mind and body only to uncover the binding forces found within us all, that of Ki. You see, this character always had a deep connection with nature. They adored its intricacies and understood that there was forces outside of our understanding which surrounded us. You could have called them somewhat of a druid and a scientist, someone who spends their days looking to flowers, listening to their songs, and then meditating on what they found. It is through these actions that they felt something deep within, as if the song was not coming from the earth, but from within them. They honed in on this feeling, a universe within oneself. This discovery sparked a new obsession, one they intended to utilize for themselves. Once discovered, they spent many seasons in meditation, under the waxing and waning sun and moon. There they found enlightenment, and the ability to heal and harm through latent Ki within. Once this ability was theirs, they wished to put it to use, and to discover the extent of it. This is where their adventure begins. In the case of this character, we went with green and blue, with green denoting an admiration for and deep understanding of nature. In some ways, this is thematic, in others, it does affect the philosophies of this character. A character in tune with nature is one who moves slow and listens. They favor wisdom and a deep understanding and appreciation of the greater ecosystems around them. In the case of blue, this is what drives them to want to understand more and push their own limits. Combined, these colors can take shape as someone who won't stop until they can find both purpose and perfection. As you can see, even if the monk has many similarities between characters, its motivations will vary by simply putting the colors first and asking where they will take your character. With each and every character bio I make, I decide on the colors first, then ask myself how they would shape that class. So let's talk about how you can use each color in the context of your monk. First is white, a color in the case of the monk that denotes discipline, as discipline in its own way is a near requirement for a monk, as the time and effort it takes to achieve such connections to ki can be a long road. On the other side of it, white can represent a monk who is selfless, one who can easily put the needs of others before themselves, due to the monastic way being one that is bred in equality. Then there is blue, the heart of perfecting one's own self, of finding the next level of the human form by tapping into one's own latent power through training and mastery. For me, this is a near given. Next is the color black, a color that is an odd addition to the monk, and while I believe it may be rarely used, it of course can find a place. Black is often the color of self-motivation, so in the case of the monk it can represent one who completes their training in order to attain some greater power or ability for one's own self to accomplish a specific goal. Then we have red, a color that represents the expressive monk, one who is not tied down to a necessarily disciplined form of the class. On another hand, they could simply wish to fight for the thrill it brings, or that of an impulsive need that drives them outside of monkhood. Finally, there is green, a color that we could attach to the monk in many cases as a core color. As a class deeply rooted in tradition, it's a color that can pair quite well. In other cases, it could be more thematic, as ki is a force present in all things, an all-encompassing force all too familiar to the color. With these colors at your disposal, and with a little more research into them, you should now have the tools you need to build and play a better monk, one who comes to life before your very eyes. There are many paths that a paladin can take when building your character, and yet the defining feature is its oath. I don't always like to place the subclasses so upfront in these videos, but in the case of the paladin, it's so core to how you build your character that it can't be ignored. I'm not talking about stats or spell lists, but rather the motivations which drive your character. And in the case of the paladin, the oath is at the heart of what makes your character who they are, even if that oath is broken. All of this factors so heavily into your character's design that we will be placing the oath up front and making it a key feature in building your character alongside the color pie. So what common thread do we see across each paladin, no matter the oath? Well, save for the Oathbreaker. Well, those key features which will decide our core color is that of dedication, discipline, and moral absolution. The paladin, no matter what it chooses to focus on, is a character who devotes its life to a cause, more so than many other classes. Whereas the class in most cases is supplementary to the character, it's the opposite for the paladin. They are their cause, and every action they take reflects the oath they have chosen. These key features tell us a lot about who the paladin is and what its core color would be. A color who is also defined by these same descriptors. I know that before I even reveal what the color is, my longtime fans probably already have an idea in their mind, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's first take a look at the color chosen by Wizards of the Coast in the set Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Pulling up the card, we can see that they have chosen white, and this is one of those cases where I wholeheartedly agree. As I said, each word used to describe the base of the paladin describes core aspects of white. We saw white show up in our Cleric video, and yet both represent different sides of the color. For the Cleric, this color denotes service to a higher power, and white's proclivity to gravitate towards religion. In the case of the Paladin, it keys into ideas of strict morality, resolve, and justice. White is the color who often works in absolutes, seeing the world as black and white. They hold themselves and the world around them to a code of conduct, often through laws or judgment. White sees the world as a chaotic place needing saving, even if the receiving party doesn't always agree. White, and to an extension the Paladin, is shrewd in its outlook and enacts its ideals as the literal and only law. this can lead to both truly heroic and selfless characters, or that of authoritarian and oppressive ones. I believe that the Paladin can be built in both ways, even through oaths which are outwardly facing as good. This absolute mindset and devoted nature is why white matches so well with the base idea of the Paladin. On the surface, the Paladin or white may seem like simple colors and characters to use, and yet you will come to see that there is a lot of nuance that can be found. And I believe the color pie will help us express this. So let's get building. To start off, I want to take our core color and add in red to see what sort of Paladin we can create from these colors' influences. An act of cruelty from another can have a lasting effect on a person, coloring their view of the world around them, and vengeance to them can seem like the only outlet for such emotions. Not just vengeance on those who did them wrong, but against all who act with hate towards others. It's an act of violence against those who do wrong to the weak, and judgment handed out is this character's only recourse. What I mean is that there are those who are acted upon by ruthless external forces who are unable to stand up to such aggressors, and the Oath of Vengeance Paladin is there to fill that role, by being that act of recourse for those unable to do so, placing fear in the heart of those who bring fear to others. In the case of our white-red character, they had felt the hand of an evil force mar their view of the world around them, and vowed that such horrific actions should never go unpunished. They found that the sword, shield, and divine magic were tools they could use to enact vengeance on the behalf of others, for those who could not stand up for themselves. They now see themselves as judge, jury, and executioner. This outlook and life have hardened them with an unquenchable resolve. You see, a traumatic experience at a young age can harden a person, and such is the case of this version of the Paladin. It isn't some oath based on irrelevant concepts, but rather an oath sworn in dark times, one which defines this character's life thereafter. White in this regard is the expression of judgment and justice. Justice on the behalf of others too weak to stand against the darkness of this world. The issue here is that justice is blind and can be dished out when it's potentially not appropriate. This can add a lot of nuance to your character when playing them, in that it can affect their empathy when it comes to actions it deems as wrong, creating a character who isn't a simple do-gooder, but rather an unwavering hand of retaliation. Red in this context is the anger which is bred through our character and their chosen oath. There is a rage which is inherent with vengeance, whether it's justified or not, and this can mar our Paladin's view of the world. Whenever we create our characters, we want them to be complex, and faults such as these can breed that complexity, and lead to moments that some Paladin role players might be afraid to tread, and yet using the colors present their hand is forced. As you can already see, the Paladin can be dynamic in its motivations when we take a look at what could lead to such oaths, and how those could be played out in our campaigns. Now, let's try something a little different here and take on an oath which would lead to a Paladin who is outwardly good in many aspects of its design. To do this, I want to remove red and add in green. An oath can be taken not just as a way to uphold justice and to punish darkness. It can be brought forth by a love of life in all forms. It's a desire to kindle the light present in the living, to bring hope into a dark world, and to protect that life at all costs. In the case of our green-white Paladin, it's a love for nature and its beauty. They see signs in the faces of the flowers, the voice of God in the songs of birds, and a vision of a better world in the clouds. This character, one day overwhelmed by what they saw, had an epiphany. It was them who was destined to stand as a shepherd for life. It was their calling to be the one who would take a strong position against the cosmic chaos which aims to break this perfection. And it was on this day they took the oath of the ancients and set their lot in with this order of paladins. taking their sword, which once was no more than a lump of sharpened steel, and presented it up high with purpose. If we look at the intersection between green and white, we'll find ideals such as the upholding of life and tradition to be shared. White will do what it can to stand against darkness, and to defend that which cannot defend itself, while green wishes to see things grow and appreciates the beauty found in all things. This ancient oath is one which has been upheld by paladins for as far back as the first elves. The Fae or Green Knight has always stood for the land and its people, and because of this tradition is a strong feature in this version of the Paladin. Once again, going back to our colors, we know that tradition and the upholding of the old way are pretty common among both of these colors. In these ways, our character devotes itself almost religiously to all that is good. And in the case of this character, we don't really have a need to add any edgy motivation. Feel free to allow your character to be positive, happy, and to bring out the best in others over themselves. But now for our final rendition, I want to do something drastic and shed both of these colors and bring in black. Because yes, white is important to the Paladin and its oath. But what happens when that oath is broken? One can devote their life to something bigger than them, only to become jaded by what it stands for. A just hand can see that their actions have little meaning and turn against who they once were for a path more in line with the cruel realities of the world around them. In the case of our character here, they fought for many years to be that hand of justice, striking down what they viewed as the evils of society, only to turn their back on what they found. As to them, it was a foolish endeavor. They had the best of intentions in their youth, standing blindly against what they felt was evil, and yet found their blades stained by the blood of those who didn't deserve it. This darkness built up inside of them until it changed them forever. On one such mission, after purging a village which had grown infected by the undead, they no longer believed in their mission and fell into darkness, casting off their oath and their last bit of humanity. I think a character like this can be tricky to play as it requires utilizing accumulated trauma as a mechanism for your character's decisions. But if you're up for the challenge, then there is some amazing role-playing moments you can conjure up. To get a full idea, let's discuss the color that is at the heart of this character. In a rare case for our supplementary character designs, I went with a monocolor, and one that opposes our core color. This choice was very deliberate. For one, to break one's oath, it would obviously put it at odds with the core color decided on earlier, as it's the opposition of ideas which white and black hold that make this character who they are. With white being a color of collective responsibility and justice, and black being instead the color of individualism and moral relativism. Where white places its purpose into the hands of a higher ideal, black places its purpose solely with itself and its own desires. So in this way, they shed their oath which bound them to a higher ideal, an ideal they found to be a lie, and in this way cast their trust completely into their own hands. Now, of course, the rejection came with a steep price, and now they push back fully against everything their previous oath stood for, and have become something of a villain themselves. Now that we've built a few characters, let's discuss each of the colors and how they can be used in relation to the Paladin. That way you can mix and match to create your own. Remember, just because we laid out some characters doesn't mean that there isn't a lot more that can be done, even if you are utilizing some of the colors and oaths I've already mentioned. To start, let's just briefly touch on white. To best accomplish this, I'm going to do something I haven't done in this series, and I will reference the alignment chart. Yes, that thing I told you to abandon in place of the color pie. Well, it does have its uses, and I think I can illustrate something by doing so. At the heart of every paladin is the core alignment of lawful, something you could hardly escape. Because in many ways, an oath is a law you have set to be the focus of your life. Now, of all the colors, there is one who applies to lawful the most, and that would be white. So just in the same way you would make your paladin almost always lawful with some combination of good, neutral, or evil, it's the same with the paladin. Place white at the heart of your paladin and then add colors on top of it to drive its motivations further. Speaking of other colors, what about the one color missing in all of the examples so far? Blue. Blue is an odd color for the paladin and one you won't see too often, but it can still be present in some cases. In the case of the blue paladin, we would be talking more about a logical view of justice and law, rather than one based in morality. It's a logical path to a better world, something we talk about when discussing what values blue and white share. Then we have black. This color will often reject an oath, in that an oath to uphold the ideals of something else goes against black's wish to focus on one's own needs. It can have trouble doing things for others unless they truly believe in it themselves. In another way, black can be used to add a layer of ruthlessness to a paladin who does follow an oath, which can have dire consequences, as their actions would be total and unwavering. The next color is one I could see you using pretty often for the paladin, and that is red. As red adds a level of fanaticism to any color it is paired with. There's something which happens to red when it's aligned with another color, in that it takes on its pair's ideals with a level of obsession not seen anywhere else on the pie. The oath becomes more than a sum of its parts. It becomes a total identity in the presence of red. Finally, we have green, a color of life and tradition in the hands of the paladin. In a lot of ways, you could take this color as the core to your paladin, depending on their motivations, and it would fit perfectly. The Paladin of Green acts to uphold the traditions of the paladins who have come before them, as well as uphold a love of life. As you can see, the Paladin is a lot more complex than a simple-minded do-gooder. I challenge you to build a character who doesn't quite fit into traditional Paladin tropes. The key to making an engaging Paladin is to pick your colors up front, then take those motivations found in those colors and focus on what would lead them to take an oath. And finally, pick an appropriate oath for your character based on your previous decisions. If you take this path, I'm confident that you will create a more interesting and engaging paladin in the process. There are those out there who find their purpose off of the beaten path, ones who do not feel comfortable in the hustle and bustle of the city, and yet are never lost in the deepest wilderness. This is the Ranger, a class which seems to model itself after the animal kingdom, and more narrowly still, its many predators. It will track its prey like that of a wolf, stalk silently like that of a large cat, or strike with the deadly precision of a snake. Above all else, the Ranger is resourceful, clever, and dangerous. They are explorers, trappers, spellcasters, tamers, and proficient warriors. Some say they aren't focused enough, but I say that all of these traits are required for them to survive within the lifestyle they've chosen for themselves. With all this in mind, I believe we can now discuss the core color of the class, the color you will most often see assigned to the class. To do so, I would like to pull up the class card designed by Wizards of the Coast in the set Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, and then discuss whether their decision for the core color works or not. Pulling up the card, we can see that they have decided on green for the core color of the Ranger, and I would have to say I agree, but for different reasons. Like I said earlier, the Ranger is molded very much around the animal kingdom, taking examples from its many predators. The idea of mimicking your ideology or methodology after nature is something very green, but I want to make a very major distinction. If you remember back when we covered the Druid, we decided on green for its core color as well, but for a different reason. What I mean, in contrast, is that it's less about nature as an abstract concept for the Ranger, and more of a focus on a specific aspect of nature, the predator. The Ranger is less interested in concepts like balance and a grander purpose, and is more focused on the thematic traits of nature's great hunters. This means that the tie to its core color is less philosophical and a little more literal. Because of this, the colors that you add to its core color have a very strong sway on its personality, as you will come to see. With all of this in mind, the Ranger makes a lot of sense matched with this color, but always remember that it's more focused and narrow. With that covered, we can now flesh out 3 characters with green as their base to help you better understand how the color pie affects the Ranger. Make sure to stick around to the end though, as we will break down each color in relation to the Ranger. That way you can mix and match to create your own. Alright, to start we will begin with a green-red Ranger. Our first character has trained in the Ranger arts since they were a child by the man they simply call Father. You can't remember a time before you lived in the woods, nor can you recall if Father truly is what his namesake implies. But for all you care, the forest is your home, and Father is your blood. He trained you to sneak, track, and fight. Your eyes molded to see what is hidden, your hands trained to be deadly weapons, the daggers you keep at your side, your fangs. Father has always taught you that the world is a dark place and there are creatures out there who do not deserve your mercy. Something about the way he says this shows the anger that's boiling deep inside of him, rooted in some past pain, you're sure of it. This mentality has seeped into you as well. You hunt with a ferocity that matches that of your mentor. While on a hunt one evening for a large feral wolf spotted in the region, you and Father are attacked by a great silver panther. If it weren't for the extreme circumstances, you would be in awe at the sight of such a rare beast. Unfortunately, the animal was more than you could handle, and before you could send it running with a grievous wound of its own, you found that Father had sustained one as well. In your arms he passes, that same fierce look still glimmering in his eyes, telling you exactly what you must do. After a small ritual and a burial, you set off to find where that silver panther has fled to, vengeance in your heart. For this character, I went with the colors green and red, the green side signifying your connection to the hunt and that of your instincts. The red side comes from a place of ferocity. While living a life that mirrors that of a wild predator, you find that your mindset will naturally drift in that direction, especially considering this character has been a wild hunter all of their life, and that their mentor had instilled such values in them. They know nothing else but the expression of red. Perhaps this is where Father's rage was rooted in as well. For our next character, we'll take a bit of a different tact and drop red from the equation and add in white. There are those who can speak to animals and understand their plight, and because of that wish to aid them in any way they can. Our next character is one such being. You believe that humans should stand in solidarity with the animal kingdom, and that there are lessons that we can learn from it. You find that you have more in common with the animals you run alongside than the humans which threaten their way of life. Because of this, you put your skills to use against those things that would threaten the animal kingdom. Abominations and poachers are your true prey. Your closest animal companion is Calren, a snowy owl who has flown at your side for what seems to be an age and a half. Her eyes are sharp and help you track and hunt in the snowy months of this northern land you call home. The blood on the snow, the only sign that you and your companion have passed through the area. As a true beastmaster, you want nothing but peace for the animals you call kin, but are no fool and understand that a well-placed arrow can be a tool for peace when the time requires it. For our green-white ranger, the colors make up an interesting combination. When green and white come together, it's a combination that's accepting and harmonious. You put your skills to use by talking with the animals and listening to their needs. You feel for them, as they have no true way to deal with such antagonists to their way of life. In that way, you put yourself in their place. You feel for their struggle and fight to protect them. You keep order in the lands you tread and put your blade and arrow to those who would disrupt it for their own gain. If you could, you would run with the wolves and forage with the bears until your waning years. But you're no fool. Their world is a harsh place, and there must be protectors out there for those who cannot protect themselves. A ranger who's an extension of the terrain, a purpose outside of yourself. With that character covered, let's move on to our final example by removing white and adding in blue and black. Trained at a young age in a loose ranger order, you learned everything required to hunt monsters and survive on your own. This order took you in alongside other stray young boys and girls to focus on nothing else but your training. Started long ago by a man no one remembers, this order was conceived to turn children into fierce hunters of any terrain, with the goal of bringing those that stalk the wilderness with ill intent to their knees. Once you were of an age and skill level to be sent off on your own, the order would find an area in the region that was underserved, or had recently lost one of its rangers, and send you to task. There, the fresh blood would cut their teeth and become one with the land they roam. You now find yourself sent off on your mission, but the years spent training and perfecting your craft leave you confident with the life set before you. You do not feel anything outside of your purpose. This harsh life with little room for anything else outside of training has resulted in the hardening of your soul and the sharpening of your instincts. You are brutal and efficient, one with the region you call home. You spend your time roaming and looking for those abominations which cause humanity harm. For this character, I went with the colors green, blue, and black. The green representing the character's close relationship with the land and its desire for a singular purpose. You see, as I've said in other videos of mine, green wishes to find that place where it fits and to fulfill that role. This is what you are meant to do, more still, what you were born to do. This all pairs well with all the traits we have previously discussed regarding Green Rangers, and their thematic ties to the color. Next is blue. This color reflects the character's perfectionism and their cold demeanor when it comes to their outlook on life. They have a task which they aim to do with the utmost skill, and have poured everything into being the best they can at it. Black, on the other hand, showcases some of the brutal aspects of the color. This character is harsh and ruthless. They can turn off any aspect of their humanity that is required. They do not do what they do because they feel empathy for others, but rather to complete a job. With all of these traits combined, this character would have a bit of trouble fitting in with your party, and they may not always help those that are outside of their mission. Nonetheless, they complete any task with deadly efficiency. As you can see, the ranger can have a, range of motivations, and while we only touched on 3, you can mix and match colors to create a ranger who fits perfectly into the type of character you want to play. To help with that, it's best we talk about each color on its own, and how it relates to the ranger class. That way you can come out of this video with your own creation, or better to find one that you've already created. Let's start with white. A ranger who has white as one of their colors is one that leans into a broader desire to help others, and at times this may be more focused on the animals it surrounds itself with, as the ranger spends very little time around other people. We won't be bringing in white's desire for order, as that isn't really relevant to a ranger. It's rather a need for peace in the region they've come to love. Next, there is blue, a color of perfectionism and learning. These traits pair pretty nicely with the ranger in some cases. As an example, this would be a great color for a ranger who works at its craft every day. They don't simply learn to lay traps or track because they need to survive. No, it's more bred from a desire to create the perfect trap, to have a second sense when it comes to tracking. Blue reflects the desire to really hone in on something and do it for the sake of learning the best way to do it. And this side of blue can actually fit really nicely with the ranger. Next, we have black, a color often associated with ideas like ambition and greed. And honestly, these sides of black do not really have any place within a ranger. Instead, the black-lined ranger takes on black's traits of ruthlessness and amorality. They don't question what is right or wrong, just what must be done. Then there's red, a color I was very close to placing as an additional core color for the class, as when green and red combine, something interesting happens. Red, for one, is the impulses at the heart of everything we do, and what's more, it's the desire for the freedom to follow those impulses. The Ranger is special in that it's not tied down to societal rules. It roams as it pleases and relies on their innate impulses, and something about that just feels right for some versions of the Ranger. So what about green then? Well, we have already talked about it at length, but I do want you to keep something in mind. Here we have a rare case of a color lending more thematic and narrow ideals to a Ranger. Of course, you could take the philosophical aspects of green and apply it to the Ranger, but in most cases it's as if the Ranger uses green as an example of how to live, not so much mirroring its more esoteric views. Of course, you can apply aspects of green's more abstract side, things like purpose and harmony, but I believe the thematic ties will often be more prevalent. With all that said, I am now very confident that you'll be able to build a more robust and interesting Ranger of your own. The difference between a simple thief and a true rogue is the culmination of ages spent honing its craft. It has been debated that it takes 10,000 hours to master a craft, and while this may be an exaggeration for you and I, it's the truth for the rogue. It is this dedication that proves to me that the rogue is clearly blue. That is, that it's not just mastery, but the concept at the core of blue, in that the rogue never reaches a cap on what it can work towards, and there's always something new to master, or a new skill or proficiency to learn. With all of that said, I would hesitate to say that blue is the one and only color at its core, as I do see another part of the whole picture. The other side of the rogue is displayed perfectly on the class card chosen for the rogue. Wizards of the Coast, and to be more specific, the Magic team, has decided that the rogue is blue-black, and I would have to agree. Why blue-black, you say? Well, if it isn't already obvious, then let me explain on what blue has started. Black is the color that feeds the rogue's motivations, while blue is the mechanism that it reaches its goals. The rogue needs black to be what it is, and to have survived as long as it has. In many cases, the rogue has lived a hard life, one that hardens it and creates an outlook which demands it only look out for number one. As we'll come to see, this isn't always the case, but I do think as a base, this is very accurate. So what does this look like when we put it all together? Well, the blue-black rogue is one that was given no chances in its early life, and has learned very quickly that the world is a hostile place, and people will take from you unless you take from them. This life isn't easy though, and it requires many skills. Because of this, the rogue perfects a mixture of practical skills and proficiencies that it hones over time. Skills that utilize the pathless tread, the swiftness of a blade, or in some cases, the use of magic. The rogue in this context believes it's better to never be seen than to face confrontation. It's better to pick a lock than ask to be let in, and it's more efficient to take a gold coin than earn it. This rogue has no illusions of heroism. It is practical, and these abilities are what has allowed it to not just survive, but to thrive. The blue-black rogue is aware that a mistake can cost you your life, and so the perfection of its skills is always top of mind. It's the combination of ruthless realization and constant improvement. To me, this is the ideal trope of the rogue, but there is so much more to be found. So let's dive into some of my own thoughts on what else the rogue can be. To do this, let's simply add white to our established core and see what we get with our first iteration. Now, when we add white to this combination, something new does happen. What we get in this case is a rogue who has a purpose outside of self-interest. Sure, they go about it with the same amoral resolve that black provides, yet it has a grander objective. Perhaps this rogue was purely blue-black when they were younger, but over time they've learned that they can put their skills to use for good, or at least for the good of their group. This rogue would have an easier time fitting into your party, as they have learned that there are those that exist who have their back, even if those allies number in the few, and they count you among them. In the case of the white, blue, black rogue, or Esper rogue as it's called in Magic, the blue present still provides the mechanism for its perfection and proficiency. Black is still the means to which it can get the job done, but no longer is the driving force of its motivations. For that, we look to white. In this instance, white is a balancing system. It keeps the rogue from acting selfishly, and instead puts its various skills to use for a cause outside of itself. Perhaps this rogue has some sort of moral code and doesn't kill or steal indiscriminately. Instead, it focuses on those that do not deserve their wealth, or whom their lives bring upon suffering to others. Perhaps this rogue could be an assassin of slavers, a spy for their kingdom, or a thief of important objects. This rogue still hides in the shadows and does dirty work. It's just that it does not waste its efforts on petty crimes or acts of selfish greed. Now, as we can see, this shift from purely blue-black to Esper provides us with a turning point for the rogue. And in a lot of ways, I see this rogue as one who has lived a selfish life. But as age and experience has set in, they've come to learn that they are more than a terror in the shadows, and that their efforts can be more important and impact others in ways that is beneficial. In the end, through this mindset, they become a force for good, or at least one that aids those it deems kin. Alright, now that we've established this version of the rogue, I want to move things into a completely different direction. Let's shed both blue and white, but we'll still hold on to black, and then add in red to see what sort of rogue comes from these circumstances. This right here is such a fun version of the rogue. By tapping into certain aspects of both black and red, we come up with a character that is unpredictable, suave, and sometimes violent. Personally, I think this type of rogue is the most fun to play, and one we see across media all the time, with characters like Han Solo or Zorro. Their wit and charm comes from their red side, and yet they're quick to the draw or fast with the sword due to their black side. But let's break it down a little further to see exactly what I mean. As we're familiar with by now, black is the side of the rogue that is a realist, rooted in a possible tough upbringing where it was forced to use skills to survive. It understands that no one ever got anywhere by playing it nice. This rogue is a scoundrel through and through, and while this does not mean they're a thug out to do no good, they're still the kind of character that will not hesitate to take any advantage presented to them. Now, the part that makes this rogue unique and, well, fun stems from the inclusion of red. In this instance, it's the source of its charm, and of its inability to simply stand by when there's adventure or loot to be had. This can result in a rogue that is a swashbuckler, a sword fighter, or a con artist. They constantly put themselves into precarious situations and enjoy the thrill of finding a way out. The thing about red and black when they're combined is that you have a combination that almost runs away with itself, in that its black side gets an idea in its head, and then the red side is adamant on following it through to its fullest extent. A lot of times this means simple pleasures and instant gratification, but often in the case of the rogue, it manifests into someone who seeks out adrenaline, or someone who gains pleasure from charming or intimidating others. It's a hard and fast lifestyle that forces it to use every ounce of its skill to get itself out of the situations it places itself into. Now that we've gotten these very standard archetypes out of the way, I want to try something a little bit different for our final combination. For that, I'll strip away black completely, but we will now bring in white and blue to see what happens. I wanted to piece together this rogue to show that while I believe black shows up in the rogue 9 times out of 10, it isn't necessary when building your rogue. Instead, I want to lean into the other side of its core colors, in blue, and then pair it with strong motivators in white and red. Once again, let's break down the rogue and see why these colors work, and how in this context they make sense. First up is white. As we know, white is the color with strong convictions. It can be a force for equality, for humanity, or order. Of course, a rogue isn't much for order, so instead, let's look at how this works for ideas like equality and humanity. I could see this rogue stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Perhaps they've been on the bad side of a power structure and now look to set things right by taking from those who take from the vulnerable. On the other end, it could be a rogue who looks to bring others together under their banner, to collect a group of outcasts who society has deemed unworthy for one reason or another. Then we add in blue, the color that is in many ways very straightforward, as it's the driving force for the rogue's perfectionism of its craft, and in some cases the source of its ability to learn some magic as well. Magic that is beyond the scope of any cut purse and would require immense dedication. Then we have red. This is where their ability to bring others in comes from. It's their charisma, their empathy, and to top it all off, their desire for adventure. When we bring this all together, we have a rogue who fights for those that cannot fight for themselves, and in doing so can actually rally others around them. In many cases, the rogue is a solo act, and that doesn't always have to be the case. They can be a presence of pure leadership. That is, if they lean into a sense of morality and adventure aided by their proficient hand. I believe that the white, blue, red rogue, or Jeskai rogue, makes for an interesting build, and is one that can bring something fresh to the table. Remember, the rogue doesn't always have to be a brooding edgelord. In this episode, we came to the conclusion pretty quickly that black and blue, when combined, make for a great core to the rogue. But in many ways, I could argue that either one of the two on their own does just as well as a core color. The interesting thing about this is that black on its own is in many ways the motivation or the backstory. When this color is present, it shows us that the rogue learned the hard way that life isn't going to hand you anything, and you must learn to take what you need. But to live this way, it needs blue to be the mechanism which facilitates the skills in which it uses to survive and to flourish. I'm sure you have noticed that there was one color missing from this video, which is unlike what we saw in previous episodes, and that color is green. Now, while I do think there is room for green, like I say in all of my videos, there's room for every color, but in the case of the rogue, I think it's more of an edge case, which is fine for some classes, as some are so defined in what they represent. But I don't want you to think that green is excluded all of the time, as I'm sure you could find ways to work it into your character. But in the end, to me, green denotes a ranger more than a rogue. As always though, let's go through each color and see how they are reflected in the context of the rogue. First up, we have white. White, in the perspective of the rogue, is the sort of moral compass that sets them on a path that is less selfish. This may reflect in a rogue who is a bit older and perhaps has seen their actions have consequences. Or perhaps it's a rogue who works within a bigger organization or a guild. One who at least looks out for those it deems friends. Next, we have blue, a color that is in many ways essential to the rogue. Sure, you may not apply this every time, but I do believe that this represents the vast skills of the rogue and the training required to reach its heights. Then there's black, a color that is just as much part of the rogue as blue, perhaps even more so, as the rogue usually comes to this profession because of a mindset built at a young age, one that has seen all that life has to offer and understands that it is an inherently selfish place, and only those willing and able to take what they want get anywhere. Then there is red, a color that can either be a tool or a source of adventure. In the first case, the rogue might use his charm and empathy to manipulate others, or to intimidate, to con them, or to gain the upper hand in a tough situation. On the other hand, it could reflect more in the type of rogue who's an adventure seeker, a swashbuckler, a sword fighter. Red within a rogue is really what produces the type of rough and tumble character we all love. Finally, there's green. A color I could almost remove from this equation, but I won't, as there is a space for every type of rogue, and I don't want to discourage you from using it. So what would green mean for a rogue? Green, in the context of the rogue, is perhaps someone who uses their skill set to sabotage the unnatural creations of man. Or perhaps it's a character who carries on the traditions of those who taught them. In the end, it's fine for there to be colors that don't quite fit every class. And I think a class like the rogue is so defined that colors outside of black, blue, and red become a bit tricky. No matter how you build your rogue though, it's important to think about how they use their skills and why. Did something in their past cause them to take the higher road or the dark alley? Do they pick the pockets of unsuspecting victims or from those who take from the poor? Do they swing their sword for a hit of adrenaline, or do they stalk the shadows using magic to pull keys from back pockets? In the end, it's all about mechanisms and motivations. So as long as you keep those points in mind, I'm sure your next rogue will be a more robust and interesting character. As I mentioned earlier, the thing that makes the Sorcerer unique is that it's the one class that doesn't seek out its power, as its power lies within it all along. This has an interesting effect on the personality of a sorcerer, in that a wizard, for example, often consists of blue mana because it takes a scholarly mindset and dedication to achieve that magic, whereas a sorcerer must instead come to terms with the abilities it has been handed. And it's in how the sorcerer deals with this aspect of itself that dictates its colors. Does the sorcerer revel in its power? Do they fear it? Or do they wish to master it and bring it under control? Over the course of this video, I will explain what color or colors are at the core of this class. But before we do that, we do need to take a look at the class colors chosen by Wizards of the Coast in the set Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. From there, we'll have a bit of a starting off point and a spark of an idea to then proceed with 3 of my own examples of potential sorcerers. But as always, remember that there is a lot of freedom when it comes to designing your characters. So if I don't cover a color or a combination that you feel fits the sorcerer, then be sure to let me know in the comments. The Sorcerer class card in AFR was given the combination of blue and red. And while off the cuff, this does seem like a perfect fit, that is, if you come from Magic the Gathering and you imagine a blue-red faction like the Izzet Guild, the problem with this being its core combination starts to fall off the more you spend time breaking it down. Sure, a blue-red sorcerer could exist, and we will discuss how, it's just I would never call this combination its base, or a defining combination like we did with red-green and the Bard. In MTG, blue-red is often spoken in the same breath as the Izzet Guild, a guild that is wild with its inventions and its take on science. But aside from its explosive nature, I'm not too sure that this fits the sorcerer's mentality, in that it's more a superficial way of looking at this class. So let's break it down, because there is still something there. The blue side of a sorcerer is honestly one of the weaker colors in my opinion, as blue means mastery, it means perfection, and it means efficiency. To me, this color isn't quite how I would define a sorcerer, at least not as a core color. As I see it, blue's traits aren't inherent to this class. But in the case of a sorcerer that does consist of blue mana, what we have is one that wishes to find out the extent of their power, of its potential. And that in itself is a very interesting motivation. But with all that said, I want to talk about the other color present, red, as I think we're going to find something a little more special, and a color more aligned with what a sorcerer is. Red is the color of expression, of pure impulsive passion, and to me, that defines a sorcerer much better than blue could ever hope to. Red, in many ways, is what makes a sorcerer what it is. If we look at it from a mechanical standpoint, I do find it interesting that the sorcerer's primary stat is charisma, And honestly, I don't think that's an accident. The Sorcerer is all about acting out the very real elemental forces that swirl within it, and it's in how it interprets these forces that make it what it is. So what does it mean to be a blue-red Sorcerer? Well, of course, as I've said, this character is passionate and is true to itself, but at the same time is eager to master the power that is their birthright. This type of Sorcerer almost takes a wizardly approach and wishes to unlock every bit of magic that is held within, in order to reach its potential, but at the same time is eager to do so in the pursuit of simply enjoying unlocking and mastering these aspects of itself. The blue-red Sorcerer is a source of introspection and explosive realization. This version is fascinating, but I want to move on to my own ideas. So for my first combination, I want to take this one step further by simply adding black to the mix and dropping the blue. We will hold on to that red though, as to me, red is very much one of the core colors of a Sorcerer. Note that I said one of, but what that other color is, you'll have to wait a bit longer to find out. The black-red Sorcerer is more than a handful. To some, power granted freely is power that must be respected, but to others, this power is a sign of their importance, and because of this, they wield their magic only in ways that suit them. The abilities of a Sorcerer can come from many places, and take many forms. We typically think of Sorcerers who are granted elemental magic, but there are those that are granted magic from darker places. And the magic that springs up from those sources fit quite nicely with a Sorcerer like this. The red-black Sorcerer is comprised of two sides. Its red side makes use of magic that is quite rash. It can flare up with their anger and consume those who stand in their way. The red side also is what gives them their charm, as they know that it takes more than magic to get what they want. Pair that with its black side, and you begin to see why this is so dangerous. The black mana present creates someone who is arrogant because of their birthright, a character that acts only on its behalf, one that may work with you and your party, but only so long as it suits them. When you bring both black and red together, you get honesty and arrogance. It's the type of character that only sees their side of things and will act out as it wishes. This way of thinking drives this Sorcerer's actions, and in every way its birthright affirms that inflated sense of ego. You can now see that the black-red Sorcerer is a dangerous pairing of colors. They may say with power comes great responsibility, but not the black-red Sorcerer. No, to them, with great power comes a hell of a lot more power. Now, I know our first two examples showed the explosive nature of the Sorcerer, as its red side being present makes them unpredictable. The problem is that with that same explosive nature, it can lead them to do things that are out of their control. And because of this, some Sorcerers have hurt the people they care about the most. An event like this early on in their life could very well eat away at them and weigh heavy on their conscience. So for this version, I want to drop the red entirely and do away with that pesky black and see what kind of Sorcerer comes from these circumstances. Let's talk about a white, blue, green Sorcerer, also known in Magic as Bant. Due to some traumatic event involving their very own magic, this Sorcerer decides that they were given a burden and not a birthright. They accept their destiny due to their green side, a side that I firmly believe is another contender for core color. This color allows them to see the bigger picture and to accept what they are and what that means. With green present, they are aware of such things as destiny and know that they have no choice in what they've been given. And because of this, they must find what this power means for them. In this version, their destiny is dictated by their white side, a side that sees the damage they can do, but also the support they can grant. This Sorcerer feels like they were given an opportunity, and they don't intend to squander it. To accomplish this goal will take discipline and a will to master their magic, and to that end, they lean into that blue side. With this aspect of their personality, they're able to maintain control over their power and to use it in a manner that is productive. With such a stark contrast between this Bant sorcerer and the red-black one, you can see what I mean when I say that character creation is all about motivations. That said, I do want to dive into what I believe is the ideal base model for the sorcerer. To do this, I'm going to drop the white and blue and bring back red to see what a red-green sorcerer would be. To me, the red-green sorcerer is a natural fit for the typical version of this class, but let's break it down to see why. As you are aware at this point, the red inside of the sorcerer is a strong contender. It speaks to a class that is all about the true power held within, and the application of that power in expressing itself. Due to the nature of its abilities, the sorcerer is often volatile, in that its magic is wild and can result in the use of magic that is out of its control. It is this wild magic that gives the sorcerer its definition though. It's a level of chaos and unrestrained power that's unmatched by many of the other classes. On the other side, we have green, a mentality that applies a strict philosophy of destiny and of carrying on the traditions of its forebears, in that it's acting out its legacy, and in doing so, finding its place within the grander scheme of the world around it. Green is also the color that accepts the role it was given, and will carry it out with a sort of honesty that the other colors might miss. When combined, we see that the red-green sorcerer is one that is pure of action, not trying to be anything else except what it is. The font of power coursing through it is the source of its being, and in acting out the will of that very power, it may find the truth of its existence. Sure, sometimes that very application can be savage and unpredictable, but in the end, that's the true nature of the red-green sorcerer. It is a class that did not ask to be what it is, but it accepts the fate handed down to it. Consider this: the sorcerer is a class that does not seek out its given role. Instead, it is the one class born into that role, and the magic that put them there has many sources. And because of this, it becomes truly hard to pin down one core color. If I were to place a core to this class, I would lean into red-green, but really any color or combination could work, almost more so than any of the other classes. Let me show you what I mean. In white, the sorcerer is a character who sees that their power is more than an inheritance. It is a responsibility, one that it intends to use for the better of others, even if that means weakening itself in the process. In blue, there is the desire to master its gift, to find the root of that power, and to unlock its potential. This sorcerer holds more in common with a wizard. It's just that instead of seeking magic through learning, it instead wishes to perfect the wellspring of power within it. When we get to black, we see that true power can corrupt. It may not shift the sorcerer into evil, but it will leave you with a character that is arrogant, one who feels better than others because of that given power. In red, there is an honesty to its actions, a need to simply feel the extent of its existence. This sorcerer can be wild and explosive, or could simply want to have fun with that magic. We see this in the strength of its charisma stat. This shows us that the sorcerer is charming, intimidating, and exciting. Finally, we see in green that there is a link with destiny, and the desire to find the truth of where their strength came from. This character yearns to understand this aspect of themselves so that they may find a purpose that is bigger than them. However you play your sorcerer is really up to you, but be sure to take into consideration the source of that power, how they feel about it, and what they intend to do with that. If you keep these 3 questions in your mind, I'm sure the next time you make a sorcerer, they'll be much more interesting and robust characters. At the heart of your typical warlock is the pursuit of power through alternative means. It's magic granted from an outside source, typically through a deal made which benefits both parties involved, even if the warlock might not realize that the deal favors the entity more than them. as it's rare for an eternal being to grant such magic if it didn't serve their own purposes first. This informs us that the Warlock is willing to take risks and depend on its cunning to reach for that forbidden magic, which already tells us a lot about the core color of the Warlock. Before we continue with that, I want to take a closer look at what Wizards of the Coast chose as the color for the Warlock in the set Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and decide if we agree with their choice or not. Pulling up the card, we see that they decided on mono black for the Warlock, and for the most part, I agree with this assumption. For one, black takes the straightest route forward to what it desires, and in this case, makes a deal or pact in order to circumvent traditional means of acquiring its abilities. A pact, while similar to a cleric's devotion, is different in that it's less subservient and more a product of the Warlock getting what it desires in exchange for what it can bring to the table for its patron. While some may stumble into this arrangement or pact, it nonetheless requires a willingness to follow through on the deal in order to maintain their power. This idea also shows that the Warlock believes itself clever, perhaps foolishly perceiving an end to its service. The presence of black also tells us that the Warlock would rather not lean on studying, or at least in traditional routes towards magic, but rather it will grasp at power that others would consider forbidden, all with the goal of gaining what it wants. This idea is at the heart of the base Warlock, and thus I'm comfortable with choosing this as its core color. Black is the color who resists servitude, and yet is willing to do what it takes to gain what it wants. This is why we see black characters lean into things like criminal organizations, groups where each member would grasp for control if it were possible, but will work within a structure if it means they get what they want out of it as well. If you noticed, I did say that I mostly agree with black as the core color for the Warlock. But in the case of this class, I would posit that there is a secondary core color as well. And for that, I would choose blue. In some cases where black is not present, blue takes over as a core color, in that blue searches for answers, and is the color that does not fear where those answers come from. In that it may hear of beings outside of reality whose whispers may cause madness, and it would be intrigued, not repelled. Also, no knowledge can be considered forbidden or out of reach. In that way, the Warlock may come into contact with a patron out of curiosity and a desire to understand the unknown, rather than be driven solely by a hunger for power. With all that said, I believe you could consider both black and blue to be core colors for the Warlock, but not so much in a way that the Warlock is black-blue, but rather in how it would be blue or black, and indeed sometimes both. Now, let's get into some examples of Warlocks, and I think you'll begin to understand what I mean, starting with the black-green-blue Warlock. There are beings out there beyond our comprehension, ancient ones who hold sway over our realm, and yet most are unaware of their presence. These otherworldly beings hold on to lost knowledge of a time before time, and of space between reality. Our Warlock in this instance was a simple person with a curious and investigative mind, one who heard of dark whispers in shadowy corners and followed them to a town where things just didn't seem right. Our Warlock has an extensive knowledge when it comes to history and lore, and has spent their life looking into tales of such beings. One night, while combing through some books, they hear a whisper in a tongue they don't quite recognize, and yet holds similarities to a language lost, one they have studied. This character follows the gripping tendrils of the voice and is led to a cave where odd hand paintings can be found decorating the stone. The whispers become louder, and it feels as if it's directed at them, so they move deeper and deeper inside. Then they are hit with something, a vision, and yet it's more than a vision because it feels all too real, because it is real. Where they stand now, there is no footing to be found, just space, and in some way time. A figure looms overhead, larger than anything they've seen before. Once again, it speaks to them in that odd language, and yet they can now understand every word. The entity makes a pact with them, stating they will allow them a fraction of their power, but at a cost. There's something they need the Warlock to do for them. It doesn't take much convincing when you're in the presence of something so grand and altogether horrifying. Something you've spent years searching for. This night changes the Warlock forever, granting them magic beyond reality. Now let's discuss the colors to learn more about who this Warlock is and why they would consider such a deal. For one, we can look to black, which makes the pact with its new patron possible. Most people would be struck with fear and recoil at the idea of working with such a being, and yet with black present, this isn't an issue. Black is willing to do what it takes to get what it wants, and doesn't have any problem taking orders from beings with bad intentions, so long as those intentions facilitate their own goals. Then there's blue, the driving force to even seek out what is hidden. At the heart of this character is the desire to understand the unknown, and that has led them to encounter such a patron. If it weren't for their blue side, they would never have gone down this path. Finally, we have green, an interesting factor into all of this, but a valid addition nonetheless. Green doesn't see things in such simple terms, and is instead accepting of that which has always been, and of existences outside of our scope which influence the world around them. Green is also fascinated with ancient lore, and the history that ties all people together. Green in many ways is the appreciation of such an entity, and of the acceptance of its role in the grander scheme of things. I could spend a lot of time talking about this sort of character because, I find it so fascinating, but in the interest of keeping this concise, let's move on to the next Warlock example. For this, we will remove blue and green, and add in red. Sometimes power for its own sake is enough motivation for a Warlock, and that is the case with the Black-Red Warlock. They hunger for what is not theirs and will take any path to get it, even if that means making deals with demons. Some who study magic are patient, curious, and devoted, but there are some who want it all right away, and that is the case with this character. When they were young, they tried, and nothing would stick. Their lessons would go nowhere, and their mentor began to lose faith in them. One night, this character decided to run away. Couldn't take this schooling anymore. The rigid structures and tough lessons were stifling, and what's more is that they were getting nothing in return. It's hard to say what it takes for a mortal to catch a demon's eye, but they do look for particular souls. Ones with nothing to lose and everything to gain. And in the case of our red-black warlock, nothing could be a better description. It's out in this late evening with the sun setting and the sky turning black, save for the stars dotting the sky, where our warlock is taken away to a realm like no other. Darkness is complete here. No stars in the sky to light the way, just a single fire and a throne of bone in the distance. This warlock, still young, is somehow not afraid, as if they expected something like this to happen. They knew they had greatness in them, and it was a matter of time before their confidence in themselves were to manifest in some way. They march forward without a second thought. Pact is made, and power is granted. Let us now take a closer look at our character and their colors to understand where the red and black come from, and the function they serve. Black and red, when combined, is the least patient of all color combinations. They don't want to sit around and wait for life to come to them. They wish instead to grip life by the horns and pull it in, wrestle it to their will. In this way, we see why our character was unable to focus on their studies, and in turn not gain magic in the traditional sense, instead opting for the fast route. Black is the restless ambition in this situation, and red, well, red is the haste at the heart, the desire to act instead of sit, to enjoy life and everything that comes with it. As well, with red present, they don't second guess any offer from a being who obviously has bad intentions. They got what they wanted, and that's all that matters. This combination leads to a warlock who is rash, confident, and self-fulfilling. But now I want to strip away black and add in green and blue, to see what sort of warlock comes from this combination. Deep within the forest, far from prying eyes, an ancient being stirs. They're not of ill intention, nor of good. They hold court in these hidden places, while the halls of man rise and fall. The intentions of such a being are hard to pinpoint. From century-old grudges to chaos for its own sake, a person who stumbles into their presence never leaves the same. In the case of our character, a person who often wanders these woods, this will indeed be the case. Perhaps in one such wandering they hear talking in a language they can't quite parse, the sounds of music and the soft glow of candlelight in the distance. Instead of fear, they feel something else, curiosity. They follow it through and come upon a space that should not be, a throne of vine and flower and a large table extended from it. They move in closer, feel compelled to bow, and ask the being for its name. The entity is charming and beautiful, but something seems off. There is a mischievous, or is it devious, look in their eye. Nonetheless, the character spends what feels like an eternity in their presence. They talk about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. A pact is made, one of mutual interest and respect. Merriment ensues for what feels like an indistinguishable amount of time. Finally, rest is had. When this character awakens, they are at the mouth of the forest and something seems off. They will never be the same again. Pact has been made, mission granted, and power given. With all of this covered, what do the colors present in this character tell us about their motivations and who they are? For this, I want to start with green. An accepting perspective lends itself to opportunities in places you don't choose to look. Just like how a calm presence can draw an animal in, this way of being can lend itself to meeting of ancient entities. This character felt one with the woods and wasn't a disrupting force, and thus was able to even meet with the soul of that wood. Their magic granted and subsequent pact was more of an extension of what they were meant to do. Then there is red. This adventurous and playful spirit is what drives much of this character's motivations. Finally, there is blue. While a minor member of this combination, in this case, it's still present. In conjunction with all the colors present, blue is less rigid and more of a maker of mystery and experimental magic. This character is one who steps through life with a light heart and a curious brain. There are many ways you can build your warlock, and even though we only touched on 3, you can begin to imagine that the motivations you set up for your character can be quite diverse. Even with that mentioned, you may have noticed one color was missing from our examples, and that was white. This isn't to say that white will never be present, it's just it wasn't covered in this video, as I took some more straightforward approaches to the class. Let's go through each of the 5 colors though and see how they are reflected in the warlock. That way you can piece together your own character with the colors that most interest you, starting with that missing color, white. In the case of the warlock, this creates an interesting relationship with their pact. It becomes less about making a deal and more about serving a greater power. Of course, this can take a dark turn, and I could almost see the white version of the warlock being part of a cult, one who worships a being beyond themselves and isn't so much in it for the power, at least not for themselves. They want to do work for this being, and that power is a mechanism to do so. This aspect almost twists the warlock into a similar role as a cleric, which would be a fun way to play your character. Next is blue, the color we almost associated with the warlock as a core color, but I would be hesitant to do so. Blue is a great color for this class because it requires a latent wish to find what is hidden, to search in places others might overlook. Blue wishes to learn what is out there and would be inclined to make such a pact if it meant more knowledge and further discovery. Next is black, a color easily found in most warlocks. Black is the color who grasps at power wherever it can be found, and is often impatient when it comes to that aspect of itself. Black might be less inclined to take traditional methods towards magic, and will always take the straightest route if it's available. Then there's red, the color who rushes into each experience, and in a lot of ways is similar to black in this way. Red might take a gamble when it comes to making a pact. You could, in this way, build a character who sort of stumbles into the relationship with their entity and takes a deal before even realizing it. In other ways, it could be the one who has a playful relationship and simply enjoys everything that comes with their pact, building a relationship with their benefactor through its charm, leaning heavily into its charismatic side. Finally, we have green, the color who understands that there are forces out there who control our reality. Green accepts these things and is willing to play its own part in the wider scope of it all, becoming a small piece of a bigger scheme. As you can see, the motivations behind your Warlock can vary, so be sure to do some research on each of the 5 colors and find a combination that works for you and the character you've built. With everything we discussed today, I'm confident it's a challenge you will now be ready for. The wizard is in many ways the equivalent to a fighter within the realm of magic wielders. An odd comparison, I know, but hear me out. Just as the fighter can pick up any weapon and be good at it, the wizard has access to a massive catalog of spells. In many ways, it's only really limited by its imagination. A wizard can peer into the unknown, conjure objects out of thin air, enchant people's minds, craft explosive damaging spells, call upon the elements, beguile with illusions, raise the undead, warp matter into new forms, and so much more. The wizard is less defined by the class itself and more by the school it chooses to focus on. So as you can imagine, it's a bit of a task to choose just 4 sets of colors and combinations that will encapsulate everything that makes a wizard what it is. Because of this, we will be speaking in broader terms, and will instead find overlap between the schools. To say that the wizard is only defined by its schools is a bit disingenuous though, and there are aspects that are unique to the class, which set it apart from other magic wielders. So let's talk about that before we start picking any of the colors. The wizard is a class defined by its hunger for knowledge, and this is reflected in its vast array of spells documented in its spellbook. To become a wizard, it takes a special thirst for discovery and learning. If this type of character couldn't conjure magic, they would still be studying lost knowledge. Perhaps they would be a scholar, an archaeologist, or an astronomer. They're curious by nature, and that curiosity never ends. They're the type of class that is willing to iterate on what they have learned, and from there, gain more understanding and knowledge. A wizard must be willing to spend the time it takes to master their craft, and sometimes won't reach their potential until old age, and I believe this has a fundamental effect on the wizard. What I mean is that this shows a level of dedication to perfection that is hard to find anywhere else. Your character might still be young and in its infancy of power when you start playing them, but its dedication is still unmistakable, and its thirst for hidden knowledge unquenchable. Okay, I'm sure you're starting to get restless. I know you've probably got a couple ideas in your head already for the core color, so let's not waste any more time. As always, we will start with the class colors chosen by Wizards of the Coast, and then we will decide if their idea of the core color hits the mark. Okay, before I reveal any cards, I want you to take a moment to pick what one color you would assign to the wizard. Think about it. Do you have it? Alright, let's reveal the card to see what Wizards of the Coast has decided. And what we have here is mono blue. I'm pretty confident that most of you chose mono blue, and honestly, I'm inclined to agree. The wizard embodies everything about blue that makes it what it is, and so yes, I will be picking this as the core to the wizard class. The distinction I want to make though is that blue is the base for the wizard, or the vanilla version. It doesn't speak to the complexity of the class, but is instead at the heart of what makes it what it is. This is a color that you'll see pop up time and time again within different versions, and really it's a building block. Rather than a color I would rest on, as the only definition for the class. Like I said, the school you choose and your character's motivations play a huge part in the colors you will be picking when you build your wizard. With that said, it is important to explain what makes the wizard blue, because without a strong base of understanding, it can be hard to add complexity on top of it. Blue is the color that represents the constant desire for improvement, and of the person who is always marching forward and building upon what has come before it. This does not always equate to knowledge, but often does. The blue character usually finds a craft to focus on, one that it can output its effective hunger for perfection upon. The reason this usually floods into knowledge, and especially in the case of the wizard, is that learning is never ending. The wizard can learn a new spell, find an application for it, perfect its use, and in time learn more potent spells, starting out casting simple rudimentary spells and eventually gaining the ability to warp time and space. The ceiling for what can be achieved by a wizard is almost the highest for this class than any other. What I mean is that a simple bookworm can eventually, through determination, become close to a god. It takes a certain kind of person to reach for such heights, but that is the determination and drive that blue provides, especially in the context of a wizard. As we will see in this video, this concept will be pulled in different directions, but blue will almost always be present. As I always say, it's up to your character's motivations though, so don't feel forced to use this color. Just be sure to place a different strong motivation in its place. Alright, let's move on to our first combination. For this, I want to add both black and white to the mix to see what we get. The white, blue, black wizard, or Esper wizard as it's called in Magic, is the type of character who has manipulation and control at the heart of its magic and motivations. It leans towards spells that tap into people's minds, into reality, or utilizes illusions. There is always a deeper secret behind the veil of existence. If you chose these colors, the result would be a character who wishes to enforce its will on reality, or desires to hold sway over the minds of the masses. Let's break it down a bit further to see what each color brings to this mentality to better understand its complexities. In the case of white within the wizard, this represents a focus on the people around them, a wider scope of thinking that wishes to change the minds of many, or of their very perception of reality. They have a grand design to their work and are not satisfied in simply creating magic for just themselves. Perhaps they will use it in politics, the wider perfection of society, or simply for the joy of manipulation. Blue, as we have covered, is the aspect of the wizard that has the drive to pursue such large and momentous tasks. It's the side of the wizard that has a bigger plan. Often blue and white, when combined, become obsessed with the perfection, protection, or manipulation of society. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves though. Why would it want to change reality, manipulate others, or enchant weaker minds? Well, that comes from its black side. This wizard may be crafty and cunning, but it always finds a way for it to benefit itself. To enchant others or to manipulate minds or reality takes a level of selfish thought. It is enforcing your will onto others and onto their perceived truths. This can't be understated enough. Most of us might feel uncomfortable doing so, as we feel we have no right over such things. But with a focus on black, this fear is shed, and a confidence and enjoyment from doing so replaces it. Even with noble intentions, the mere act of enforcing your will on other people or reality will always be a selfish one. Now, I do really enjoy this type of wizard, but be careful not to trust them. They always have a bigger plan in mind than your simple adventure. Alright, let's move on to a different version of the wizard, one that takes change in a different direction. For that, I want to take both white and black out of the equation and add green. The result of this change is now a wizard who extends its curiosity to nature itself and gains some pleasure from the conjuring of objects and creatures, or of the transmutation of one entity into another. This wizard might enjoy the light-hearted side of magic, and its motivations are a product of simple curiosity. A character who likes to see what can happen with a bit of experimentation on what nature already provides, while still respecting certain forms. If we look at the colors present, we see why. Blue, as always, is the curiosity, the mindset that sees potential in everything. Blue often will be restless when it knows that there is more that can be done, and nature as it is has nothing but room for growth and change. It simply is adding to that evolution. This isn't to say that the wizard does not enjoy what already is present. It will master spells that tap into what nature already provides, bringing creatures into existence, transforming one thing into another, and traveling to every plane of reality. Now, this is all possible with a pairing like green, a color that balances the wizard and prevents it from taking its magic too far, or allowing its arrogance to get a hold of itself. It is the color of perspective, meaning that this character doesn't want to necessarily bend nature to its will in order to gain power, but instead wishes to take what is static and turn it into something dynamic. This wizard is also wise and patient, willing to take things slow, never rushing into bad decisions. Sometimes this means that this wizard lives a solitary life, one where it studies and watches, learning anything it can from the natural world and applying what it has learned onto its magic. Now, if this type of wizard isn't for you, then perhaps we can take things in the opposite direction with the next wizard on our list. For this wizard, we will drop green and blue, then add in a color of action in red and of personal motivation in black. Alright, now this is where things get a little bit different. The black-red wizard's motivations are far from what we established in our previous examples. They are rash, arrogant, and explosive, utilizing their magic in ways that expresses their natural talent. While many wizards spend their long lives studying and honing their craft, the concept behind this wizard is of one who came upon its power rather young. And this has a fundamental effect on how they view both magic and themselves. Now, it's not the same as a sorcerer who is often born with their power, but rather a wizard who has a natural talent that is unmistakable, in that every spell they attempt to learn comes easy to them. It's as if they have a pure understanding of magic deep down, instead of a need to work hard to gain any amount of that power. This has a fundamental effect on the wizard and creates a character that is arrogant and direct, one who doesn't find any aspect of magic off limits. This is reflected in the magic they use, opting out of spells that manipulate or modify, and in favor of spells that might seem off limits to some, like that of necromancy, as black has no qualms with using forbidden spells, and red only pushes that further. On the other side of it, perhaps this character makes use of magic that is direct, and focuses on dealing a lot of damage with no thought as to what spell is best for what situation, as a simple fireball often solves a lot of problems in an instant. Many wizards can often fall into some level of arrogance as they gain power. I mean, if you could bend reality to your will, wouldn't you be? The key difference is that the typical wizard has a respect for magic that it has gained from a long life of study. And someone who does not respect their magic and only sees it as a tool for their ambitions is someone who can be rather dangerous, and that is often the case with the black-red wizard. Now, whether that benefits your party or not really depends on if you can keep them on your good side. This character might be a bit of a jerk, but their knack for understanding magic cannot be denied. As you can see from our examples here today, blue very much is a major part of the wizard. And yet, I would rarely suggest you go with mono blue. There are times when I would recommend using only the core color or colors, but in the case of blue and the wizard, it truly is a core, and your character is only truly built when you start to add colors. So let's do just that. I want to make my way through the color pie and see what each color brings in order to help you decide which colors you would like to pull from in order to create the best wizard to fit your character's motivations. Let's start with white. White, in the case of the wizard, is one who focuses on other people, or in the upholding or manipulation of civilization through magic. This can take a few forms depending on the other colors present. Just be sure to understand that when you add white, your character usually will uphold some larger ideal, whether that is a superiority that allows for the manipulation of the masses, or results in an idealist that helps shape civilization in order to bring it forward into a new dawn. All of that is up to you. Then we have blue, which we talked about in length already, but essentially blue is the color of a visionary, of efficient iteration. It's at the heart of the wizard because it takes a real desire to learn, to study, and to observe to become a wizard. In many ways, it's the most scholarly of all the classes in Dungeons & Dragons. Next, we have black, another color I honestly could see come up time and time again as the wizard grows in power. This might be the kind of color that shows itself as your wizard gains levels, in that the more power it wields, the more it would have to fight off the urge to feel superior to others. Black is a great color to have within oneself, but if it's ever shown proof of its superiority over others, it can be hard for black not to become arrogant and self-absorbed. Next, we have red, a color that would lean more into a rash and fun-loving wizard. My belief is that this color would be more present in younger wizards, one who see their fireballs shoot forth and are thrilled by the result, a character that almost does magic for the joy of simply rolling damage dice, rather than the methodical and critical thinking of other wizards. Finally, we have green, a color that I would see as the opposite end of the spectrum, one who has lived many lifetimes, and they have seen many things and peered deeper than most could imagine. Because of this, they might have a wider perspective and see the world from a different view than others could even hope to grasp. To say that the wizard is easy to pin down would be a lie. The wizard in many ways is shaped by a myriad of motivations, and thus their coloration can be diverse. Things like age, school of magic, upbringing, motivations, and many other components can really influence your color choices. This is one of those classes where I would suggest you revisit their colors from time to time, as they might change with power and more understanding. Perhaps they are red-blue in their youth, then they shift to black-red-blue as they gain power, finally settling into white-blue-green, once they become the closest thing a mortal can get to a god and have higher perspective. Like always though, don't be afraid to experiment and come up with your own ideas. Just be sure to take into consideration the effect that such powerful magics can have on a character, and in doing so, I'm sure you'll be able to craft more interesting and robust characters. Well, thank you so much for making your way through this extensive guide. This series was a year in the making, and it honestly means a lot to me. But that leaves us at an endpoint, and then I must ask you, where do you think we should go next when it comes to applying the color pie to your characters in Dungeons & Dragons? So hit me up in the comments with any concepts you have or things you would like to better understand and apply the color pie to. That way we can work together to make D&D a more interesting experience for all. With that, friends, I will catch you in the multiverse. Bye.